In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a single whisper in a tea shop, the sparrow's nest. Under the harvest moon, sets Miss Jane Marple's keen mind ablaze. Who are the strangers plotting a midnight delivery? What deadly secret lies hidden in the village's ancient past as shadows stir and danger creeps closer? One tiny observation by an unassuming spinster could unravel a mystery that threatens to destroy everything. Will Miss Marple's quiet brilliance save her village? Or will the harvest moon reveal a truth too dark to face? Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Tea Shop in the drowsy heart of St. Mary Mead, where the cobblestone streets curled like sleepy cats under the autumn sun. The tea shop was a haven of warmth and gossip. Its windows glowed with the amber light of late afternoon, casting a soft halo over the mismatched tables where villagers sipped tea and traded stories. The air was thick with the scent of scones, clotted cream, and the faint tang of bergamot from steaming Earl Grey. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, a delicate china cup cradled in her hands, her knitting needles clicking softly like the ticking of a clock. To the casual observer, she was just an elderly spinster, her silver hair neatly pinned, her cardigan as unassuming as the wallpaper. But her eyes, sharp as a hawk's, missed nothing. The tea shop, known as Mrs. Puddock's Kettle, was unusually busy today. The harvest festival was a week away, and the village buzzed with preparations. Farmers haggled over the price of pumpkins. Children darted through the square with ribbons for the maypole, and the vicar's wife fretted loudly about the flower arrangements. Amid this hum, Miss Marple's ears caught a discordant note low. Urgent conversation at a table near the window, where two strangers sat, their heads bent close. One was a weary man with a pinched face, his coat too large for his frame, as if borrowed from a larger relative. His fingers twitched around his teacup, betraying a nervous energy. The other, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a scarf wound tightly around her neck, spoke in a hushed tone, her eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple, pretending to adjust her knitting, tilted her head ever so slightly to listen. "The sparrow's nest. That's what he said," the woman murmured, her voice barely audible over the clink of teaspoons. "It's got to be there, under the harvest moon. We can't miss it." The man leaned closer, his voice a gravelly whisper. "And the delivery, you're sure it's set? Midnight, by the old mill. But we need to be careful. This place, it's not as sleepy as it looks." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. The sparrow's nest. An odd phrase, one she hadn't heard since her childhood, when her grandmother spun tales of a hidden treasure buried in St. Mary Mead centuries ago. The legend was a village favorite, told over crackling fires, a cache of gold, or perhaps jewels, hidden by a reclusive squire who trusted no one but his pet sparrow. The story had faded into myth, dismissed by most as a fanciful tale to entertain children. But these strangers didn't sound like they were chasing bedtime stories. She sipped her tea, her mind racing. The harvest moon was 3 nights away, and the old mill, abandoned since the war, was a crumbling relic on the edge of the village, a perfect place for secrets. She glanced at the strangers again, noting the man's scuffed boots, caked with mud that didn't match the dry paths of St. Mary Mead. The woman's scarf, silk and expensive, was at odds with her plain coat. Outsiders, clearly, and not the usual tourists drawn to the village's quaint charm. Mrs. Puddock bustled over, her apron dusted with flour, and set a plate of scones before Miss Marple. More tea. Miss Marple, or perhaps a slice of my lemon drizzle cake, fresh from the oven. Miss Marple smiled, her expression as warm as the teapot. "The scones will do nicely, Mrs. Puddock. You've outdone yourself again." As Mrs. Puddock beamed and hurried off, Miss Marple used the distraction to study the stranger's table. A crumpled map lay between them, its edges worn, as if it had been folded and unfolded 100 times. The woman traced a finger along it, pausing at a spot Miss Marple couldn't see. The man nodded, then slipped the map into his coat pocket as they rose to leave. The woman's scarf slipped slightly, revealing a faint scar across her collarbone, a jagged line, like a warning. The bell above the door jingled as they left, and Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her mind weaving a different kind of pattern. The sparrow's nest, the harvest moon, a midnight delivery, these were threads of a mystery, and she intended to follow them. She finished her tea, paid Mrs. Puddock with a generous tip, and stepped into the crisp autumn air. St. Mary Mead was a postcard of pastoral charm. Thatched cottages, a church spire piercing the sky, and the village green where geese waddled with proprietary arrogance. But beneath its idyllic surface, Miss Marple knew, currents of intrigue often ran deep. She walked slowly toward the village library, a modest building stuffed with dusty tomes and the occasional romance novel. If the sparrow's nest was more than a legend, the library's archives might hold a clue. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and wax polish. Miss Emily Tuttle, the librarian, greeted her with a nod. Miss Marple, here for your usual detective novels. Not today, Emily, Miss Marple said, her voice mild. I'm curious about village history. Anything on local legends, perhaps? The squire's treasure, for instance. Emily's eyes lit up. Oh, the sparrow's nest. My grandfather used to tell me that story. Said the squire hid his fortune in a place only his sparrow could find. I'll dig out what we have. As Emily bustled off, Miss Marple settled at a table, her notebook open. She jotted down what she'd heard: sparrow's nest, harvest moon, midnight delivery, old mill. The words stared back at her, cryptic but tantalizing. Emily returned with a leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with age. This is the oldest record we have, Emily said. Mentions the squire, Thomas Blackthorne, from the 1700s. Bit of an eccentric, by all accounts. Miss Marple thanked her and began to read. The squire, it seemed, was a solitary man, widowed young, with a passion for codes and riddles. He'd built a manor, now a ruin, near the mill, and kept a pet sparrow, which he trained to carry tiny messages. The book hinted at a hidden vault, its location encoded in a rhyme. Where the sparrow nests, beneath the stone, lies wealth no man shall call his own. She closed the book, her thoughts spinning. A vault, a code, a treasure, and now strangers in her village, whispering about it. The coincidence was too stark to ignore. She tucked her notebook away and thanked Emily, promising to return the book soon. Outside, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of apricot and rose. The harvest festival loomed, and with it, the harvest moon. 3 nights to unravel a mystery that had slept for centuries. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a fire and settled into her armchair, her knitting in her lap. The stranger's words echoed in her mind, mingling with the squire's rhyme. She thought of the old mill, its sagging beams and ivy-choked walls. A delivery at midnight suggested something illicit, smugglers, perhaps, or worse. But the sparrows nest tied it to the village's past, a puzzle she was determined to solve. She rose and crossed to her writing desk, where she kept a small map of St. Mary Mead, hand-drawn from memory. She marked the mill, the manor ruins, and the church, tracing possible routes the strangers might take. Her finger lingered on the mill, its isolation both a lure and a danger. She'd need to be cautious, but caution was her specialty. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple recalled a similar incident from years ago, when a young man in the village had been caught forging checks. His nervous tics, the way he avoided her gaze, were not unlike the wary strangers. People she knew were predictable in their flaws, and these strangers were no exception. The woman's scar, the man's muddy boots, the map, they were clues, each a stitch in the tapestry she was weaving. She glanced at the clock. 9 o'clock. The village was settling into its nightly quiet, but Miss Marple felt a spark of anticipation. Tomorrow, she'd visit the mill, ostensibly to sketch wildflowers for the festival committee. It would give her a chance to scout the area, to look for signs of the stranger's plans. She wrote one final note in her book: investigate mill. Watch for sparrow's nest. With that, she closed her notebook, satisfied with the day's work. The mystery was afoot, and Miss Jane Marple, armed with nothing but her wits and a pair of knitting needles, was ready to meet it. The next morning, St. Mary Mead sparkled under a clear sky, the air sharp with the promise of autumn. Miss Marple, dressed in her sensible tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, she told her neighbor, Mrs. Clement, she was off to capture the mill's rustic charm for the festival program. Mrs. Clement, distracted by her yapping terrier, nodded absently. The path to the mill wound through fields of golden wheat, the stalks swaying in a gentle breeze. Miss Marple walked slowly, her eyes scanning the ground for anything unusual: footprints, discarded items, anything that might betray the stranger's presence. The mill loomed ahead, its wheel long still, its stones mossy and weathered. She paused at a distance, pretending to sketch the wild asters that dotted the riverbank. Her eyes, however, were on the mill's entrance, a sagging door half off its hinges. The surrounding grass was trampled, as if by recent visitors. She noted a faint tire track in the mud, too narrow for a farmer's tractor. A bicycle, perhaps, or something smaller, like a motorbike. She filed the observation away, her pencil moving idly over her sketchbook. A rustle in the bushes made her pause. She turned, her expression serene, but her senses alert. A rabbit darted out, its white tail bobbing, and she relaxed slightly. Still, she felt watched, the hairs on her neck prickling. She continued sketching, humming softly to herself, the picture of an harmless old lady. But her eyes darted to the mill's upper window, where a shadow flickered briefly before vanishing. She finished her sketch, a passable rendering of the asters, though her true focus was elsewhere, and approached the mill, her steps deliberate. The door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a dusty interior strewn with broken crates and cobwebs. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew. She stepped inside, her shoes silent on the stone floor. Near the far wall, she spotted something unusual, a pile of straw, too neatly ranged to be natural. She knelt, her joints protesting, and brushed the straw aside. Beneath it was a trapdoor, its edges flush with the floor, a rusty padlock securing it. Her heart quickened. The sparrow's nest, or something more mundane, like a smuggler's cache. She straightened, her mind racing. The padlock was old but sturdy, and she had no key. But the straw suggested someone had been here recently. Perhaps the strangers from the tea shop. She memorized the trapdoor's position, noting its proximity to the mill's wheel shaft. A clever hiding place, if that's what it was. As she left the mill, the shadow in the window flickered again. She didn't look up, keeping her pace steady. Whoever was watching would think her a curious old woman, nothing more. Back on the path, she made a mental note to speak with Mr. Hayworth, the village's amateur historian, who might know more about the mill's history. If the squire's treasure was real, the mill could be its resting place. That evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her notebook open once more. She added to her earlier notes: mill trapdoor, padlock, recent activity. shadow in window. The pieces were falling into place, though the picture was far from clear. The stranger's urgency. The coded phrase, the mill's secrets, they pointed to something larger than a simple theft. But what? She thought of her nephew Raymond, a writer who loved to spin tales of espionage. He'd laugh at her suspicions, call them the fancies of a village spinster. But Miss Marple knew better. Evil, she'd learned, wasn't confined to city, streets, or grand manors. It crept into places like St. Mary Mead, hiding behind polite smiles and whispered words. As she prepared for bed, she glanced at her notebook one last time. The harvest moon was 2 nights away, and with it, the promised delivery. She'd need to be ready, her wits sharper than ever. For now, she was content to let the mystery simmer. Like a pot of Mrs. Puddock's tea, tomorrow would bring new clues, new threads to weave. Miss Marple turned down her lamp, the cottage settling into darkness. Outside, the village slept, unaware of the secrets stirring in its shadows. But Jane Marple was awake, her mind as bright as the moon, ready to unravel the enigma of the sparrow's nest. Chapter 2. The vicar's uneasy guest vicarage of St. Mary Mead stood at the edge of the village, a quaint stone building draped in ivy, its windows glowing with the soft light of late afternoon. The air carried the faint scent of roses from the garden, where bees hummed lazily among the blooms. Inside, the parlor was a haven of polished oak and chintz, with a fire crackling in the hearth despite the mild autumn day. Miss Jane Marple sat in a cushioned armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, her pale blue eyes flicking occasionally toward the stranger seated across from her. The man, introduced by the vicar as Mr. Clarence Vane, was an oddity. In St. Mary Mead, he claimed to be a historian, arrived only yesterday to research a local legend about a hidden treasure, tied to the cryptic phrase the sparrow's nest. Yet, his demeanor suggested something less scholarly. His tweed jacket, though well-tailored, was slightly rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His hands, gripping a teacup, trembled faintly, and his dark eyes darted to the windows every few moments, as though expecting an intruder to burst through the lace curtains. Miss Marple, invited for tea by the vicar's wife, Mrs. Clement, had been observing him since she arrived. She noted the way he avoided direct eye contact, his answers to the vicar's polite inquiries clipped and vague. When Mrs. Clement asked about his research, he muttered something about old manuscripts, and quickly changed the subject to the weather. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. She had seen this sort of unease before in people with something to hide. "More tea, Mr. Vane?" Mrs. Clement asked, her round face beaming with hospitality as she lifted the porcelain teapot. "No, thank you," Vane replied, his voice tight. He set his cup down with a clink, the saucer wobbling slightly. "I really must be going soon. Much to do." "Oh, but you must tell us more about this treasure," Mrs. Clement pressed, oblivious to his discomfort. "The sparrow's nest. It sounds so romantic, doesn't it, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's needles paused. "Quite intriguing," she said softly, her tone as mild as the steam rising from her tea. "I have heard the old tales myself. A treasure, hidden in St. Mary Mead, guarded by a code no one's cracked in centuries. Do you believe there's truth to it, Mr. Vane?" Vane's fingers twitched, and he shifted in his seat. "Legends are often just stories," he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But they're worth exploring. For history's sake, of course," Miss Marple said, her gaze steady. "Though some say the sparrow's nest isn't just a phrase, but a code. Perhaps for a place, or even a person. Have you come across anything like that in your research?" The question hung in the air like a delicate thread. Vane's face paled slightly, and he reached for his teacup again, only to realize it was Empty. A code, he said, his voice a touch too high. No, nothing so specific. Just folklore. Mostly. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. But her mind was alight with curiosity. She had heard the phrase "the sparrows' nest" only yesterday, whispered in the tea shop by two strangers who spoke of a delivery under the harvest moon. Now, here was this man, claiming to study the same legend, yet his nerves betrayed him. Was he one of the strangers from the tea shop? His voice didn't match, but his unease suggested a connection. The vicar, Leonard Clement, leaned forward, his spectacles glinting. You know, Mr. Vane, our village has its share of secrets. The church crypt, for instance, some say it's linked to the treasure. Have you visited it yet? Vane's hand jerked, knocking his spoon to the floor with a faint clatter. The crypt, he said, bending to retrieve it. No, not yet. I'm more focused on documents. Miss Marple's eyes followed the spoon's descent, noting the way Vane's fingers fumbled as he picked it up. His hands, she observed, were not those of a scholar. The nails were bitten to the quick, and a faint scar ran across his knuckles, as if he'd been in a scuffle or two. Not the hands of a man who spent his days turning pages in dusty archives. Documents can be so revealing, she said, her voice gentle but probing. I once knew a young man in St. Mary Meadow, years ago, who found a family secret in an old letter. Quite changed his life. Have you found anything surprising in your work, Mr. Vane? He froze, the spoon still in his hand. Surprising? No, nothing out of the ordinary. He set the spoon down carefully, as if it might shatter. Just the usual historical details. Double quotes. Mrs. Clement clapped her hands. Oh, but you must share something. We're also curious, isn't that right, Leonard? The vicar nodded, but before he could speak, Vane stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm terribly sorry, he said, his voice strained. I've just remembered an appointment. Thank you for the tea. He was halfway to the door when Miss Marple called out, her tone as sweet as honey. Mr. Vane, you've forgotten your notebook. Vane stopped, his shoulders stiffening. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto the small leather-bound book on the side table, where he'd left it when he arrived. Miss Marple had noticed it earlier, its edges worn, a pencil tucked into its spine. She hadn't touched it. Of course, that would be impolite, but she'd seen the way he clutched it when he thought no one was watching. Oh, yes, he said, forcing a laugh. Can't lose that. Thank you, Miss Marple, she supplied, her smile unwavering. Safe travels, Mr. Vane. He grabbed the notebook and hurried out, the door closing with a soft thud behind him. Mrs. Clement blinked, puzzled. What an odd man, she said. So jumpy. Do you think he's really a historian, Miss Marple? I'm sure he's very dedicated to his work, Miss Marple replied, her needles resuming their rhythm. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying Vane's every gesture, every hesitation. He knew more about the sparrow's nest than he let on, and his fear was palpable. Was he hunting the treasure or running from it? The vicar excused himself to prepare for evensong, and Mrs. Clement bustled off to clear the tea things, leaving Miss Marple alone in the parlor. She set her knitting aside and stood, her movements slow but deliberate. The side table where Vane's notebook had rested caught her eye. There, tucked beneath a doily, was a scrap of paper, barely visible. She glanced toward the kitchen to ensure Mrs. Clement was occupied, then gently lifted the doily. The paper was small, torn from a larger sheet, and covered in a hasty scrawl. Miss Marple's heart quickened as she recognized a cipher, a series of letters and numbers ranged in a grid, A3, K7, P2, S9. Below it, in a different hand, was a single word: mill. She slipped the paper into her sleeve, her face as placid as ever. The old mill, abandoned for years, was a mile from the village, its wheel long stilled. If Vane was meeting someone there, it could be the key to unraveling the mystery. That evening, Miss Marple sat at her cottage desk, a single lamp casting a warm glow over her notebook. She copied the cipher carefully, her neat handwriting filling the page. The code was simple enough: a substitution cipher, perhaps, or a coordinate system. She tested a few possibilities, her mind as sharp as the pencil she twirled. After an hour, she cracked it. The letters and numbers corresponded to a phrase: meet at midnight. The word mill was a clear directive. Vane, or someone he was working with, had a rendezvous planned. Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes narrowing. The sparrow's nest, the delivery, the millet was all connected, and Vane was at the heart of it. But was he a villain, or merely a pawn? His trembling hands suggested fear, not greed. She recalled a young man from her youth, a nervous boy who'd been drawn into a smuggling ring. His fear mistook him for guilt until she'd pieced together the truth. Vane might be in over his head, coerced by someone more dangerous. She closed her notebook and stood, her resolve firm. The mill was no place for a lady of her age to visit alone at midnight. But Miss Marple had never let propriety stop her. She would observe from a safe distance, hidden by the willows that lined the riverbank. Whatever Vane was up to, she would uncover it, one careful step at a time. The night was cool, the harvest moon casting silver light over St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple, dressed in a dark shawl and sensible shoes, moved silently along the lane. The mill loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the sky. She found a spot behind a cluster of willows, her small figure blending into the shadows. From there, she could see the mill's broken door and the faint glow of a lantern inside. At precisely midnight, a figure approached Vane, his tweed jacket unmistakable. He glanced around nervously, clutching his notebook. Another figure emerged from the mill, a burly man with a farmer's cap pulled low. Miss Marple's breath caught. She recognized him, Tom Grayson, a local farmer known for his quiet demeanor and struggling farm. What was he doing here? The two men spoke in low tones, their words indistinct but their tension clear. Vane gestured sharply, and Grayson shook his head, his shoulders hunched. Miss Marple strained to hear, catching only fragments. Package, not safe village. Then, as Grayson turned, the moonlight glinted off something in his pocket, a key, small and ornate, unlike any she'd seen in St. Mary Mead. The meeting ended abruptly, with Grayson stalking back into the mill and Vane hurrying away, his notebook clutched to his chest. Miss Marple waited until both were gone before slipping back to her cottage, her mind racing. The key in Grayson's pocket was no ordinary key. It had the look of something ancient, perhaps tied to the village's locked relics. And Vane's notebook, left so carelessly at the vicarage, might hold more clues. The next morning, Miss Marple sat in her garden, sipping tea and pretending to read. Her thoughts were on the key and the cipher. Grayson's involvement surprised her. He was a man of few words, not one for schemes. Yet his refusal to cooperate with Vane suggested he was protecting something or someone. The sparrow's nest, she mused, might not be a treasure at all, but something far more dangerous. She rose, her decision made. She would visit the village hall, where an ancient chest, rumored to hold the treasure, had sat locked for generations. If Grayson's key fit that chest, it could unlock the mystery or unleash something the village wasn't prepared for. Miss Marple smiled faintly, her knitting tucked into her bag. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play her part. As she walked toward the village hall, The sun warm on her shoulders, she felt a familiar thrill. St. Mary Mead might seem a sleepy place, but beneath its surface lay secrets as tangled as the ivy on the vicarage walls. And Miss Marple, with her quiet observations and unassuming air, was just the person to untangle them. Chapter 3. Shadows at the milled harvest moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, casting a silver glow across the rolling fields and the sleepy village nestled within them. Its light spilled over the thatched roofs, glinted off the cobblestones, and danced on the sluggish waters of the millstream that wound its way past the old mill. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and the last of the summer's hay, and a stillness settled over the village, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was the kind of night that invited secrets, and Miss Jane Marple, with her sharp eyes and sharper mind, was ready to uncover them. She stood at the edge of her garden, her slight figure cloaked in a dark shawl, her silver hair tucked neatly beneath a woolen cap. To any passerby, she might have appeared as just another elderly villager taking a late-night stroll, perhaps to soothe a restless mind. But Miss Marple was not restless, nor was she aimless. Her purpose was as precise as the knitting needles she so often wielded, and tonight, those needles were poised to unravel the thread of a mystery that had begun with a whispered conversation in the tea shop. The cryptic words she'd overheard, the sparrow's nest, delivery, harvest, moon, had lodged in her mind like burrs, pricking at her curiosity. The strangers' hushed tones, their furtive glances, had suggested something clandestine, and Miss Marple's long experience with human nature told her that such secrets rarely boded well. For a village as small and trusting as St. Mary Mead, her discreet inquiries had led her to the old mill, a crumbling relic of the village's past, where the millstream gurgled and the ancient wheel creaked in the wind. It was here, she suspected, that the strangers' rendezvous would take place, and she intended to be a silent witness. Miss Marple moved with the quiet grace of someone accustomed to blending into the background. Her steps were soft on the dew-damp grass as she followed the narrow path that skirted the village and led to the mill. The night was cool, and she drew her shawl tighter, her eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The mill loomed ahead, its weathered stone walls bathed in moonlight, the wheel casting long, jagged shadows that stretched like fingers across the ground. She paused behind a gnarled oak, its branches providing ample cover, and surveyed the scene. The mill was deserted, or so it seemed. The windows were dark, the door shut fast, and the only sound was the steady trickle of the stream. But Miss Marple knew better than to trust appearances. She had seen too many quiet facades hide turbulent truths, village squabbles, illicit affairs, and once, memorably, a poison pen that had nearly torn St. Mary Mead apart. She settled against the tree, her breath slow and even, and waited. Minutes passed, then an hour. The moon climbed higher, its light sharpening the edges of the world. Just as Miss Marple began to wonder if her instincts had led her astray, a faint crunch of gravel broke the silence. She stiffened, her eyes narrowing as a figure emerged from the path leading from the village. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the heavy tread of someone unused to stealth. His silhouette was familiar, and as he stepped into the moonlight, Miss Marple recognized him, Tom Hargreaves, the local farmer whose fields bordered the mill. His face was set in a grim line, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jacket. He glanced over his shoulder, as if expecting pursuit, and Miss Marple noted the tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted to the shadows. Tom stopped near the mill door, his breath visible in the cool air. He stood for a moment, as if weighing a decision, then pulled something from his pocket. The moonlight caught it a glint of metal, small and slender. A key, Miss Marple thought, her pulse quickening. She leaned forward slightly, careful not to rustle the leaves, and watched as Tom tucked the key back into his pocket. He muttered something under his breath, too low for her to catch, and paced a few steps, his boots scuffing the gravel. Before Miss Marple could speculate further, another sound reached her ears, a softer, more deliberate crunch of footsteps. A second figure appeared, this one slighter, moving with a cautious grace that suggested familiarity with secrecy. The moonlight revealed a man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a scarf. It was the stranger from the vicarage, the so-called historian who had left behind a coded note and a trail of unease. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She had suspected he would be here, but seeing him confirmed her fears. Whatever was afoot, it was no mere academic pursuit. The two men met near the mill door, their voices low but carrying in the still night. Miss Marple strained to hear, her mind cataloging every word, every inflection. "You're late," Tom said, his voice rough with irritation. "I don't like waiting out here. Not with half the village asleep and the other half sticking there, noses where they don't belong." The stranger's tone was smoother, almost conciliatory, but there was an edge to it, like a blade wrapped in silk. "My apologies, Mr. Hargraves. I had to be certain I wasn't followed. You have the key." Tom's hand twitched toward his pocket, then stopped. "I've got it, but I'm not handing it over till you tell me what this is really about." "You said it was just a package, but I'm not fool enough to believe that. What's in it? And why's it got to be hidden here?" The stranger hesitated, and Miss Marple caught the flicker of calculation in his posture. "It's better you don't know the details," he said at last. "The less you know, the safer you are. Just give me the key, and I'll take care of the rest." Tom shook his head, his voice rising slightly. "Not good enough. I've got a family, a farm. I'm not risking everything for some city man's scheme. You tell me what's in that package, or I walk away." The stranger's scarf slipped slightly, revealing a sharp jawline and eyes that glinted in the moonlight. "You don't want to do that, Tom. My employer isn't the sort to take kindly to refusal. You agreed to help, and you'll see it through. Is that a threat?" Tom's voice was low, dangerous. He took a step forward, his bulk looming over the smaller man. "I didn't sign up for this. You said it was a simple job, hide the package, keep my mouth shut. But I hear things, you know, whispers in the village. People saying there's something valuable, something dangerous. I want the truth." Miss Marple's heart beat a little faster. Dangerous. The word echoed in her mind, conjuring memories of other cases, other secrets that had threatened the peace of St. Mary Mead. She leaned closer, her eyes fixed on the two men, noting the way Tom's hand hovered near his pocket, the way the stranger's fingers twitched as if itching for something, a weapon, perhaps, or a bargaining chip. The stranger's voice dropped to a whisper, and Miss Marple had to strain to catch his words. "The package is a relic. Something old, something powerful. It's been hidden for centuries, and my employer believes it's here, in your village. The key you have it unlocks the hiding place. That's all you need to know. Do your part, and you'll be paid handsomely." Tom snorted, unconvinced. "A relic? What kind of relic needs sneaking around in the dead of night? You think I'm daft? I've heard the stories, the sparrow's nest, the treasure. If this is about that, I'm not helping you dig up something that could curse us all." The stranger's laugh was sharp, cutting through the night. "Superstition, Tom? I didn't take you for a man who believes in fairy tales. The sparrow's nest is just a name, a code. There's no curse, only value. Give me the key, and you Can wash your hands of it." Tom's face darkened, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought he might strike the stranger. But then he stepped back, his shoulders slumping. "I'll think on it," he said gruffly. "But I'm not promising anything. You come back tomorrow night, and maybe I'll have an answer." The stranger's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "Tomorrow. Then don't make me wait, Tom. And don't think you can run from this. My employer has eyes everywhere." With that, he turned and melted into the shadows, his footsteps fading into the night. Tom stood for a long moment, staring after him, then cursed under his breath and trudged back toward the village. Miss Marple remained still, her mind racing. A relic, a key, a hiding place. The pieces were coming together, but the puzzle was far from complete. She waited until Tom's figure disappeared around the bend, then slipped from her hiding place and approached the mill. The door was old, its wood warped and splintered, but the lock gleamed faintly, as if recently replaced. Miss Marple ran her fingers over it, her touch light and practiced. The key in Tom's pocket, she was certain it fit this lock. But what lay beyond? A package. The stranger had said, but his evasiveness suggested it was more than a simple parcel. And Tom's reluctance, his mention of a curse, hinted at a deeper fear, one rooted in the village's history. Miss Marple stepped back, her eyes sweeping the mill's exterior. The moonlight revealed faint carvings on the stone walls, symbols, worn by time, but still legible. A bird, perhaps a sparrow, its wings spread as if guarding something. She made a mental note to consult the village archives. If there was a legend tied to the sparrow's nest, it might hold the key to the mystery. As she turned to leave, a faint sound stopped her, a soft scrape, like a boot on stone. She froze, her senses alert. The sound came from the far side of the mill, near the stream, moving silently. She circled the building, keeping to the shadows. There, crouched by the water's edge, was a third figure, cloaked and hooded. They were rifling through a small satchel, their movements quick and nervous. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Another player in this game, one the stranger and Tom hadn't mentioned. The figure pulled something from the satchel, a small, glinting object, too small to identify from her vantage point. They tucked it into their cloak and stood, glancing round as if sensing they were watched. Miss Marple pressed herself against the mill's wall, her heart steady despite the thrill of discovery. The figure hesitated, then hurried off into the woods, leaving the satchel behind. Miss Marple waited until the sound of their footsteps faded, then approached the satchel. It was plain, made of worn leather, and contained only a few items: a crumpled map, a stub of pencil, and a single feather, small and gray, a sparrow's feather. She thought, her lips curving slightly. She tucked the feather into her pocket and unfolded the map. It was rough, hand-drawn, with lines and symbols. That meant little to her now, but promised answers with study. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her shawl, her mind already turning to the next step. The walk back to her cottage was uneventful, but Miss Marple's thoughts were anything but. The stranger's insistence, Tom's fear, the mysterious third figure, they were all threads in a tapestry she was only beginning to see. The key in Tom's pocket was central, she was sure, and the locket fit held secrets that could shake St. Mary Mead to its core. As she reached her gate, the church clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing across the village. Miss Marple paused, her hand on the latch, and glanced back at the moonlit fields. Shadows at the mill, she murmured to herself, her voice soft but resolute. And shadows always hide something. She stepped inside, her mind alight with possibilities. The map, the feather, the key, they were clues. And Miss Marple was nothing if not a collector of clues. She would study the map, revisit the village's legends, and keep a close eye on Tom Hargreaves. The stranger would return tomorrow night, and she intended to be ready. For now, though, she lit a single candle and sat at her desk, her notebook open before her. With precise, delicate strokes, she began to write, capturing every detail of the night's events. The mystery was deepening, but Miss Marple was undaunted. She had faced darker secrets than this, and she knew that even the most carefully hidden truths could not withstand the quiet persistence of an observant mind. The village slept, unaware of the danger lurking in its midst, but Miss Marple was awake, and she would see this through to the end. The next morning, St. Mary Mead bustled, with its usual quiet rhythm. The bakery sent the scent of fresh bread wafting down the high street. Children laughed as they ran to school, and the postmistress sorted letters with her usual efficiency, or so it seemed. Miss Marple, however, noticed a slight tremor in Mrs. Price's hands as she handed over a parcel, the way her eyes flicked nervously to the door. Another thread, Miss Marple thought, filing it away. She spent the morning in the village library, a small room tucked behind the church, where dusty tomes and yellowed records held the history of St. Mary Mead. The librarian, Miss Clara, was a friend and only too happy to help, though she raised an eyebrow at Miss Marple's request for books on local legends, treasure stories. "Jane," she said, her voice teasing, "I didn't think you went in for that sort of thing." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, Clara, you'd be surprised what catches my fancy these days." By noon, she had found what she was looking for, a slim volume of folklore. Its pages brittle with age, it told of the Sparrow's Nest, a name given to a hidden chamber in the village, said to guard a treasure from the days of the Civil War. The treasure was vague gold, jewels, or something more perilous. The text hinted that its hiding place was tied to the mill, the church, and a key passed down through generations. Miss Marple closed the book, her mind turning to Tom Hargreaves. Was he a guardian of this key, or merely a pawn in someone else's game? She returned home for lunch, her thoughts occupied by the map she'd found. Spreading it on her kitchen table, she studied its lines and symbols. It was not a map of the village as it stood now, but of an older St. Mary Mead, with landmarks that had long since vanished. The mill was marked, as was the church, and a faint line connected them to a third pointed copse of trees near the village square. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The copse still stood, though it was now little more than a cluster of oaks surrounded by benches, a hiding place. Perhaps the afternoon passed in quiet observation. Miss Marple took her usual walk, stopping to chat with neighbors and listen to the village's pulse. She noted Tom Hargreaves at the market, his face drawn and his eyes shadowed. He avoided her gaze, and she made no move to approach him. Patience, she knew, was her greatest ally. Instead, she visited the copse, her steps slow and deliberate. The trees were old, their roots twisting through the earth, and she wondered if one of them hid a secret hollow, perhaps, or a buried chest. As evening fell, Miss Marple prepared for another night at the mill. She packed a small thermos of tea, a flashlight, and her notebook, her movements methodical. The stranger's threat to Tom lingered in her mind, and she suspected the rendezvous would be more heated tonight. She chose a different vantage point, a low rise overlooking the mill, where she could see both the door and the stream. The moon was still bright, though clouds drifted across it, casting fleeting shadows. She arrived early, settling into the grass with the patience of a hunter. The mill was silent, but the air felt charged, as if the night itself were holding its breath. At precisely 10 o'clock, Tom appeared, his figure unmistakable. He carried a lantern, its light bobbing as he approached the mill. The stranger was already there, leaning against the door, his scarf pulled high. Their voices carried, sharper now, laced with tension. "You've had time to think," the stranger said, his tone clipped. "What's it to be, Tom, the key? Or trouble?" Tom's voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the strain beneath it. "I'm not giving you anything till I know what I'm dealing with. You say it's a relic. But what kind? And who's this employer of yours? I've got a right to know." The stranger stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You've got no rights here, Tom. You're in too deep to back out now. Hand over the key, or I'll make sure your farm goes under." Debts pile up fast, don't they? Miss Marple's eyes widened. A threat to Tom's livelihood. It was a bold move and a dangerous one. She watched as Tom's fists clenched, his body tensing as if ready to lunge. But then he stepped back, his voice low. "You don't scare me. I've faced worse than you. Come back tomorrow, and maybe I'll have what you want." The stranger laughed, a cold, brittle sound. "You're playing a dangerous game, Tom. Tomorrow's your last chance." He turned and vanished into the shadows, leaving Tom alone. Miss Marple waited until Tom left, then slipped down to the mill. The satchel was gone, retrieved by the mysterious third figure, she assumed. But the carvings on the wall caught her eye again, and this time, she noticed something new, a faint outline, barely visible, of a sparrow's nest etched into the stone. She traced it with her finger, her mind racing. A clue, perhaps, to the hiding place itself. As she made her way home, the village was quiet, but Miss Marple's thoughts were anything but. The stranger's threats, Tom's defiance, the mysterious figure by the stream, they were all pieces of a puzzle that was growing more complex by the hour. The key in Tom's pocket was the linchpin, she was certain, and the locket fit held the secret of the sparrow's nest. But whose hand would turn it, and what would they find? She reached her cottage, her candle flickering as she sat at her desk. The map, the feather, the carvings, they were all clues, and Miss Marple was determined to follow them. The village's peace hung in the balance, and she would not rest until the shadows at the mill were brought into the light. Chapter 4. The locked chest. Morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak floor. She sat at her small writing desk, her notebook open, the cryptic phrase "sparrow's nest" scrawled in her neat, looping handwriting. The events at the old mill the previous night lingered in her mind. The glint of the key in the farmer's pocket, the tense exchange, the sense of something hidden, something dangerous. St. Mary Mead, her quiet village, was humming with secrets, and Miss Marple's sharp instincts told her the answers lay close, perhaps too close, to home. She sipped her tea, the porcelain cup warm in her hands, and considered her next move. The village hall, a modest stone building at the heart of St. Mary Mead, housed an ancient chest said to be linked to the village's oldest legend, a treasure hidden centuries ago to protect the community from ruin. The chest, locked for generations, was a relic of whispers and half-forgotten tales. But Miss Marple suspected it was no mere artifact. The farmer's key, she was certain, was its match. And if the sparrow's nest was indeed a code, as the nervous stranger had hinted, then the chest might hold the key to unraveling the mystery or unleashing something far worse. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her mind racing despite her serene expression. She would visit the village hall today, under the pretense of helping with the flower show preparations. It was the perfect excuse. No one would question an elderly spinster's interest in dahlias and roses. But first, she needed to confirm her suspicions about the chest. She closed her notebook, slipped it into her handbag, and set out, her sturdy shoes tapping lightly on the cobblestone path. The village hall stood at the end of the high street, its ivy-clad walls glowing in the morning light. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and old books, with a faint trace of lavender from the sachets tucked into the corners. The hall was bustling, with volunteers arranging tables for the flower show. Their chatter a cheerful hum. Miss Marple greeted Mrs. Price, the formidable organizer, with a warm smile. "Jane, how lovely to see you," Mrs. Price exclaimed, her arms full of chrysanthemums. "Have you brought your roses this year?" "Oh, I'm afraid my roses are a bit temperamental," Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. "I thought I'd lend a hand with the arrangements instead. Perhaps I could tidy the back room. It's looking a bit neglected." Mrs. Price, distracted by a wilting peony, waved her off. "Bless you, Jane. The back room's a frightened records and that dusty chest. Do what you can." Miss Marple nodded, her heart quickening. The back room was exactly where she needed to be. She slipped through the crowd, her small figure unnoticed amid the flurry of ribbons and vases. The back room was dim, its single window half covered by a heavy curtain. Shelves lined the walls, stuffed with ledgers and faded photographs, but Miss Marple's eyes went straight to the chest. It was smaller than she'd imagined, no larger than a traveling trunk. Its dark wood carved with intricate vines and birds. A heavy iron lock, tarnished but sturdy, guarded its secrets. She knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the carvings. A sparrow, its wings spread, was etched near the lock, almost hidden among the leaves. Her breath caught. The sparrow's nest wasn't just a phrase, it was here, carved into the chest itself. She stood, her mind racing. The farmer's key had to fit this lock. But why was it so important? And why were strangers circling the village, whispering about deliveries and treasures? She needed to speak to the farmer, Mr. Harrow, but confronting him directly would be too bold. He was a cautious man, not easily swayed, and she sensed he was protecting something or someone. As she pondered, a faint creak broke her thoughts. The door to the back room was ajar, and a shadow moved outside. Miss Marple froze, her heart steady despite the sudden tension. She stepped silently to the side, positioning herself behind a stack of crates. The door opened wider, and a figure slipped inside. A man, tall and lean, his face obscured by a cap pulled low. He moved straight to the chest, his movements quick and purposeful. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. She recognized the coat tweed, slightly frayed at the cuffs. It was the stranger from the vicarage, the so-called historian who had fled after dropping his coded note. What was he doing here, alone? He knelt by the chest, pulling a small tool from his pocket, a lockpick, its metal glinting in the dim light. He worked quickly, his hands trembling slightly, muttering under his breath. Come on, he whispered, his voice taut with frustration. "It has to be here." Miss Marple held her breath, her mind cataloging every detail. The angle of his shoulders, the faint scent of tobacco clinging to his coat, the way his left hand shook more than his right. He was nervous, desperate even. But before he could progress, a loud crash echoed from the main hall, table overturning, followed by Mrs. Price's indignant shout. The stranger cursed softly, shoving the lockpick into his pocket. He stood, glancing around, and Miss Marple pressed herself deeper into the shadows. He didn't see her, but his eyes darted to the chest one last time before he slipped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Miss Marple waited a moment, then emerged, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She approached the chest again, examining the lock. There were fresh scratches around it, evidence of the stranger's attempt. He was no historian, she was sure of that now. But what did he want with the chest, and why risk breaking in during the day? She was about to leave when another sound stopped her. A low, Deliberate creak from the hall's side entrance. Someone else was here. She moved swiftly to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. A figure stood outside, cloaked in a dark coat, fumbling with the lock on the side door. The figure was shorter, stockier, with a scarf wrapped tightly around their face. They carried a small crowbar, its edge catching the sunlight. A break-in attempt in broad daylight. Miss Marple's lips pursed. This was no coincidence. The chest was drawing too much attention, and she needed to act quickly. She slipped out of the back room, blending into the crowd of volunteers. Mrs. Price was still fussing over the overturned table, oblivious to the danger. Miss Marple approached her, keeping her voice light. "Mrs. Price, I heard an odd noise by the side entrance. Perhaps someone should check." Mrs. Price frowned but nodded. "Probably those boys playing tricks again. I'll send Mr. Gibbs." Miss Marple smiled, satisfied. Mr. Gibbs, the caretaker, was a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude. He'd scare off the intruder without raising too much alarm. She watched as he strode toward the side entrance, his heavy footsteps echoing. A moment later, there was a shout, followed by the sound of running feet. The cloaked figure had fled. Miss Marple returned to the main hall, her eyes scanning the crowd. Something caught her attention, a small, shiny object on the floor near the side entrance. She bent down, pretending to adjust her shoe, and picked it up. It was a button, brass with a faint anchor design, slightly tarnished. She turned it over. In her hand, her mind racing. She'd seen this button before, on the stranger's coat at the vicarage. He hadn't just tried to pick the lock, he'd been part of the break-in attempt. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion outside. Mr. Gibbs was back, red-faced and grumbling. "Some fool tried to jimmy the lock," he told Mrs. Price. "Ran off before I could get a good look. Probably after the silverware again." Miss Marple nodded to herself. Silverware was the least of their worries. The chest was the target, and the stranger was more involved than she'd thought. She slipped the button into her pocket, her mind already planning her next move. Confronting the stranger directly would be risky. He was clearly desperate, and desperate men could be unpredictable. But she needed answers, and she needed them soon. She left the village hall, her steps measured but purposeful. The high street was quiet now, the volunteers dispersing for lunch. Miss Marple made her way to the tea shop, where she often found clarity over a pot of Earl Grey. As she settled into her usual corner, she noticed Mr. Harrow, the farmer, sitting alone at a table, his face drawn. He was nursing a cup of coffee, his hands wrapped tightly around it, as if seeking warmth. Miss Marple approached, her smile gentle. "Mr. Harrow, may I join you? I could use a bit of company." He looked up, startled, but nodded. "Of course, Miss Marple. It's been a morning." She sat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I couldn't help but overhear some talk about the village hall. Quite a stir today." Mr. Harrow's eyes flicked to hers, wary. "Stir? What kind of stir?" "Oh, just some nonsense about a break-in," she said airily, watching his reaction. His fingers tightened around the cup, and a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Nothing to worry about, I'm sure. But it does make one think about treasures, doesn't it? Old stories, locked chests, that sort of thing." His face paled slightly, but he forced a laugh. "You and your stories, Miss Marple. The village. Hall's got nothing but dusty records and Mrs. Price's peonies." "Perhaps," she said, her eyes twinkling. "But I've always thought there's more to St. Mary Mead than meets the eye. Don't you?" He didn't answer, his gaze dropping to his coffee. Miss Marple sipped her tea. Letting the silence stretch, she'd planted the seed, and Mr. Harrow's reaction confirmed her suspicions. He knew more about the chest and the key than he was letting on. But he was frightened, and frightened men needed careful handling. As she finished her tea, a young woman burst into the tea shop, her face flushed. It was Lucy, the postmistress's assistant, known for her penchant for gossip. Miss Marple, Mr. Harrow, you'll never believe it, someone tried to break into the village hall. Mr. Gibbs chased them off, but they left a right mess. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Goodness, how alarming. Did they take anything? Not that anyone can tell, Lucy said, breathless. But the side door's all scratched up. Mrs. Price is in a state. Mr. Harrow shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the door. Miss Marple noted his unease, filing it away. Thank you, Lucy, she said kindly. I'm sure it'll all be sorted out. Lucy nodded and hurried off to spread the news. Miss Marple turned back to Mr. Harrow, her voice soft. It's strange, isn't it? All this fuss over a quiet little village makes one wonder what someone might be looking for. He met her gaze for a moment, then looked away. I've got to get back to the farm, he muttered, standing abruptly. Good day, Miss Marple. She watched him go, her mind buzzing. The button in her pocket felt heavy. A tangible link to the stranger. The chest, the key, the sparrow's nest. They were pieces of a puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to fit them together. But she needed to be cautious. The stranger wasn't working alone, and the cloaked figure at the village hall suggested a larger scheme. Someone wanted the chest's contents badly, enough to risk a daytime break-in, and Miss Marple suspected they wouldn't stop there. She returned home, her cottage a haven of calm amid the growing storm. Sitting at her desk, she pulled out the button and examined it again. The anchor design was unusual, not something you'd find on a common coat. She recalled the stranger's nervous demeanor at the vicarage, his evasive answers, his sudden flight. He was no master criminal, but he was entangled in something dangerous. And the cloaked figure, had they been working together? Or was there a second party involved? Miss Marple opened her notebook, adding the button to her list of clues. She sketched its design, her pencil moving with precision. Then she wrote, stranger private investigator. Hired by whom? Cloaked figure accomplice or rival? Key with Mr. Harrowfit's chest, sparrow's nest code for chest's contents. She leaned back, her eyes narrowing. The chest was the heart of the mystery, but its contents were still a question mark. The village legends spoke of a treasure, but treasures could be many things: gold, documents, or something far more dangerous. The stranger's desperation, Mr. Harrow's fear, the break-in attempt, they all pointed to something worth risking everything for. As evening fell, Miss Marple lit a small fire in her parlor, the crackle of the flames soothing her thoughts. She decided to invite the stranger for tea tomorrow, a direct approach, but cloaked in her usual charm. If he was as nervous as he seemed, she might coax the truth from him, or at least enough to point her toward the next clue. But she'd need to be careful. The village was no longer the safe haven it appeared, and Miss Marple knew that even the smallest observation could tip the balance between safety and danger. She closed her notebook, her mind already mapping out the conversation. The stranger would come, she was sure of it. And when he did, she'd be ready. For now, the chest remained locked, its secrets safe, but not for long. Miss Marple smiled to herself, her eyes bright with determination. St. Mary Mead might be a small village, but it was her village, and she would protect it, one tiny observation at a time. The night deepened, and the village settled into silence. But Miss Marple's mind was far from quiet, weaving together threads of suspicion and curiosity. The locked chest was calling, and she was ready to answer. Chapter 5. The stranger's telltale afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's modest drawing room. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea, and the faint sweetness of lavender from a vase on the mantelpiece. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her usual tweed skirt and pale blue cardigan, adjusted her spectacles and surveyed the scene with her characteristic blend of quiet curiosity and unassuming sharpness. Her home was a sanctuary of ordered doilies neatly arranged, a polished silver tray set with a teapot, and a plate of delicate cucumber sandwiches prepared for her guest. But beneath the serene domesticity, her mind buzzed with the threads of a mystery that had begun to unravel in the village. The stranger, Mr. Reginald Harcourt, was due any moment. Miss Marple had invited him under the pretense of discussing local history, a topic she knew would appeal to his claimed profession as a historian. In truth, she intended to probe deeper into his connection to the cryptic phrase, the sparrow's nest, and the coded note he'd left behind at the vicarage. His abrupt departure from that tea, coupled with his trembling hands and evasive answers, had set her instincts tingling. She wasn't one for rash judgments, but something about Mr. Harcourt suggested a man caught in a web not entirely of his own making. A sharp rap at the door broke her reverie. Miss Marple smoothed her skirt and called, "Come in," with a voice that carried both warmth and an unspoken authority. The door creaked open, and Mr. Harcourt stepped inside, his tall frame slightly stooped as if weighed by an invisible burden. His dark overcoat was dusted with the faint chalk of the village lanes, and his eyes, sharp but weary, darted around the room before settling on Miss Marple. He clutched a worn leather satchel, its edges frayed from use. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low and tinged with unnervousness that belied his attempt at composure. "Thank you for inviting me. I wasn't expecting such hospitality." "Nonsense, Mr. Harcourt," she replied, gesturing to a cushioned chair by the tea tray. "It's no trouble at all. A cup of tea does wonders for conversation, don't you think? Please, sit." He hesitated, then lowered himself into the chair, his satchel resting awkwardly on his lap. Miss Marple poured tea with deliberate care, her movements precise but unhurried, giving her time to observe. His fingers twitched as he accepted the cup, and a faint sheen of sweat glistened on his brow despite the coolness of the room. Nervous, she noted, but not necessarily deceitful. A man under pressure, perhaps. "I understand you're researching our little village's history," she began, her tone light as she passed him a sandwich. "St. Mary Mead may seem sleepy, but it has its share of secrets. Have you found anything particularly intriguing?" Harcourt's cup rattled faintly against its saucer. "Oh, it's a charming place," he said, too quickly. "Old churches, manor houses, that sort of thing. I'm compiling notes on local legends, you see, for a monograph." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling behind her spectacles. "How fascinating. I've always found legends to be such curious things, half truth, half shadow. Take our local tale of the sparrow's nest, for instance. Quite a peculiar story, don't you think?" His hand froze mid-sip, and for a moment, his face was a mask of startled recognition. He recovered swiftly, but not swiftly enough. "The sparrow's nest," he said, his voice a touch too casual. "I've come across it, yes. Something about a hidden treasure, I believe." "Oh, indeed," Miss Marple said, leaning forward slightly, her tone as gentle as a breeze, but carrying the weight of intent. "A treasure. Or perhaps something more dangerous. Codes and secrets have a way of stirring trouble, don't they? I find it remarkable how often the past reaches out to tangle with the present." Harcourt's jaw tightened, and he set his cup down with a clank. I'm not sure I follow, Miss Marple. She tilted her head, her expression one of kindly patience. Come now, Mr. Harcourt. You're a man of learning, or so you say. That note you left at the vicarage quite a clever cipher, I must say. I took the liberty of deciphering it. A meeting at the old mill, wasn't it? Under the harvest moon. The color drained from his face, and his satchel slipped to the floor with a soft thud. For a moment, he seemed poised to bolt, but Miss Marple's steady gaze held him in place. She had a way of making flight seem futile without uttering a single threat. How did you? He began, then stopped, rubbing his hands together as if to ward off a chill. You're not what you seem. Are you, Miss Marple? She chuckled, softly, a sound like the rustle of leaves. Oh, I'm precisely what I seem, a nosy old spinster with a fondness for puzzles. But I do dislike seeing my village troubled, and you, Mr. Harcourt, seem to be at the heart of something troubling indeed. Why don't you tell me your story? I find the truth often saves a great deal of bother. He stared at her, his eyes searching hers for judgment or malice and finding neither. Slowly, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging as if a dam had broken. You're right, he said at last. I'm not a historian. My name is Reginald Harcourt, but I'm a private investigator. I was hired to find something hidden in St. Mary Mead. Something tied to that blasted sparrow's nest. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her face serene but her mind racing. Go on, she said simply. Harcourt leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. It started 3 months ago. I was approached by a man calls himself Mr. Grayson, though I doubt that's his real name. Wealthy, cold as ice, with a way of making you feel like he's already measured your coffin. He hired me to track down an artifact, something buried in this village centuries ago. He called it the sparrow's nest, said it was worth a fortune, but dangerous in the wrong hands. I didn't ask too many questions at first. Money was good, and I needed the work. He paused, glancing at the window as if expecting Grayson's shadow to loom there. But the deeper I got, the stranger it became. Grayson knew things, details about St. Mary Mead, about old families here, about that legend. He gave me a cipher, to start with, one that led to the vicarage. That's why I was there, poking around. But every step I take, I feel him watching, like a hawk circling prey. And I'm starting to think he's not after treasure for its value, he wants it for something darker. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained placid. Darker how, Mr. Harcourt? He hesitated, his fingers knotting together. I overheard him on a call once, when I was supposed to be out of earshot. He mentioned leverage and control, said the sparrow's nest could bring a city to its knees if used right. I don't know what it is, Miss Marple, but it's no ordinary relic. And I'm in over my head. If I don't deliver, I'm a dead man. If I do. He trailed off, his face haunted. Miss Marple set her cup down, her mind weaving together the threads of his tale. The sparrow's nest, the coded note, the meeting at the millet all pointed to something hidden. Something powerful enough to draw a man like Grayson to a quiet village. She thought of the farmer's key, the locked chest in the village hall, and the glint of metal she'd seen at the mill. Pieces of a puzzle, but not yet a picture. You've been honest with me, Mr. Harcourt, she said at last, her voice gentle but firm. That's a good start. But you're right, you're in deep, and running won't help. Tell me, what does this Grayson look like? And what exactly did he ask you to find? Before Harcourt could answer, a sharp trill cut through the room. His pocket buzzed, and he fumbled for a small, battered phone. His face paled as he read the screen. It's him, he whispered. Grayson. He's here, in the village. Miss Marple's heart quickened. But her expression didn't waver. "Answer it," she said calmly, "and put it on speaker, if you please." Harcourt's hands trembled as he tapped the screen and set the phone on the table. A voice, smooth and cold as polished marble, filled the room. "Reginald, I trust you're making progress. I've just arrived in St. Mary Mead, and I expect results by tomorrow night. The sparrow's nest is close, I can feel it. Don't disappoint me." Harcourt swallowed hard. I'm working on it, Mr. Grayson. It's complicated. The village. Complicated?" The voice sharpened, a blade unsheathed. "You're not paid to find complications, Reginald. You're paid to deliver. The mill, the chest, the key. Don't pretend you haven't found them. I want the nest, and I want it now. Or perhaps you'd like to explain yourself to my associates." Harcourt's eyes darted to Miss Marple, wide with panic. She gave a small, encouraging nod, her mind already turning over the implications. Grayson knew about the mill and the chest. Someone in the village was feeding him information, a traitor, perhaps, or a frightened soul coerced into betrayal. "I'll get it," Harcourt stammered. "Just give me time. You have until midnight tomorrow," Grayson said, his tone final. "Don't make me come looking for you." The line went dead. Harcourt slumped in his chair, his face ashen. "He'll kill me," he muttered. "He knows too much. Someone's talking, Miss Marple. Someone in this village is his eyes and ears." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her mind sifting through the villagers she knew so well. The postmistress, with her nervous glances, the shopkeeper, always lingering near gossip, or someone else, hiding behind a mask of neighborly charm. "Then we must be cleverer than he is," she said briskly. "You're not alone in this, Mr. Harcourt. I'll help you, but we must work quickly. Tell me everything, every clue, every name, every place Grayson mentioned." Harcourt nodded, his resolve hardening under her steady gaze. Over the next hour, he spilled the details of his investigation, the cipher that led to the vicarage, a vague reference to a guardian in the village, and Grayson's obsession with a locked chest rumored to hold the sparrow's nest. Miss Marple listened intently, her fingers tapping lightly on her teacup as she filed away each piece of information. She noted his mention of a map Grayson had provided, one he'd lost in his haste to flee the vicarage. It matched the coded map she'd later find in the farmer's barn, a detail she kept to herself for now. As the clock struck 6, Miss Marple stood, her small frame radiating quiet determination. "We have a day to outwit Mr. Grayson," she said. "I suggest you stay low, Mr. Harcourt. Avoid the village square and the mill for now. I'll make some inquiries of my own. Meet me tomorrow at the church, noon sharp. There's something there we need to see." Harcourt rose, his expression a mix of gratitude and fear. "Why are you helping me, Miss Marple? You don't even know me." She smiled, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "Oh, I know enough, Mr. Harcourt. I know you're frightened, and I know you're not the villain of this piece. Besides, I've never cared for bullies like your Mr. Grayson. They do upset the balance of a village, and I am rather fond of this one." He managed a weak smile, then slipped out into the gathering dusk, his satchel clutched tightly. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind already turning to the next step. The church, with its ancient crypt and whispered legends, held answers. She was sure of it. But Grayson's presence in St. Mary Mead changed everything. A man like that didn't travel lightly, and his threat of associates suggested a larger game at play. She crossed to her writing desk, pulling out her notebook. In her neat, precise handwriting, she jotted down the new clues. Grayson, wealthy, dangerous. Knows of mill. Chest, key, village traitor, church crypt next. She paused, then added a single word, urgent. The village was quiet as night fell, but Miss Marple knew better than to trust the silence. Somewhere out there, a traitor whispered, a key gleamed, and a secret waited to be unlocked. She closed her notebook, her lips curving into a determined smile. Mr. Grayson might think himself a hawk, but he hadn't reckoned on the sharp eyes of a sparrow. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. The village bathed in the soft light of early autumn. Miss Marple, ever punctual, arrived at the church well before noon, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The old stone building loomed ahead, its spire piercing the sky like a needle. She'd always found churches to be places of clarity, where secrets seemed to linger in the shadows of stained glass and worn pews. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. She moved quietly, her eyes scanning the familiar space for anything out of place. The crypt, mentioned in Harcourt's tale and hinted at in the farmer's coded map, was her destination. But first, she needed to ensure they wouldn't be disturbed. As she approached the altar, a faint creak echoed from the vestry. Miss Marple froze, her heart steady, but her senses alert. She slipped behind a pillar, her small form blending into the shadows. A figure emerged, a woman, her movements furtive. It was Mrs. Price, the postmistress, her face pale and her hands clutching a bundle of letters. She glanced around, then hurried toward the crypt stairs, disappearing into the darkness below. Miss Marple's lips tightened. Mrs. Price had always been a nervous sort, but this was something else. A spy, perhaps, feeding Grayson information, or another pawn in his game. Either way, the crypt held answers, and Miss Marple intended to find them. She waited until the silence returned, then followed, her steps light on the worn stone stairs. The crypt was a maze of ancient tombs and dusty relics, lit only by a few flickering candles. Mrs. Price was nowhere in sight, but a faint scratching sound drew Miss Marple deeper. She rounded a corner and stopped short. There, carved into the wall, was an inscription: "The sparrow's nest guards the heart of the village. Seek the key where shadows fall." Her breath caught. The farmer's key, the locked chest, the sparrow's nest, it all converged here. But before she could examine the inscription further, a shadow moved behind her. She turned, her heart leaping, but it was only Harcourt, his face taut with urgency. "Miss Marple," he whispered. "I found something, a letter in my room, slipped under the door. It's from Grayson. He knows I spoke to you." She took the letter, her eyes scanning the sharp, angular handwriting. "Reginald, your new friend won't save you. The nest is mine. Midnight, the crypt." Miss Marple folded the letter, her mind racing. Grayson was closing in, and the village's peace hung by a thread. But she had one advantage: her tiny observations, the kind that men like Grayson overlooked. The postmistress, the inscription, the key. She would weave them together, as she always did, to protect St. Mary Mead. "We have until midnight," she said softly, her voice steady as steel. "Let's make it count, Mr. Harcourt." The chapter closed with Miss Marple standing in the crypt, her small figure dwarfed by the ancient stones, but unyielding in her resolve. The sparrow's nest was close, and so was danger. But Jane Marple had never shied away from either. Chapter 6. The farmer's Sacroth morning sun cast a golden glow over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the dew-kissed leaves of the ancient oaks that lined the village lanes. Miss Jane Marple, with her basket of knitting and a carefully chosen hat, a soft lavender one, unassuming yet elegant, stepped lightly along the cobblestone path toward the outskirts of the village. Her destination was Meadowview Farm, home of Tom Wheeler, the farmer whose uneasy demeanor at the old mill had lingered in her mind like a half-stitched pattern. The events of the previous days had woven a tapestry of intrigue. The cryptic phrase, Sparrow's nest, overheard in the tea shop, had led her to a coded note, a moonlit meeting, and the glint of a key in Tom's pocket. Each clue was a thread, and Miss Marple, with her knack for seeing the shape of things before they were fully formed, sensed that Tom held a piece of the puzzle. His reluctance at the mill, the way his eyes darted as if expecting a shadow to leap from the darkness, suggested he was guarding something, perhaps out of fear, perhaps loyalty. Today, she would find out. Meadowview Farm lay nestled in a shallow valley, its fields rolling gently toward the horizon, dotted with grazing sheep and the occasional burst of wildflowers. The farmhouse itself was a sturdy, weather-beaten structure, its stone walls softened by climbing ivy. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the neatly stacked hay bales and the faint cluck of hens from a coop nearby. Everything seemed orderly, yet there was a stillness to the place, as if the farm itself were holding its breath. She knocked on the door, her gloved hand tapping lightly but firmly. A moment later, Tom Wheeler appeared, his broad frame filling the doorway. He was a man, in his late 40s, with weathered hands and a face lined by years of toil under the sun. His eyes, a deep hazel, flickered with unease as they met hers. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Didn't expect you so early. Come for a cuppa?" "That would be lovely, Tom," she replied, her tone warm but with a hint of purpose. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how you're faring. The village has been rather lively of late." Tom's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Lively's one way to put it. "Come in, then." The kitchen was cozy, with a worn oak table and a hearth where a kettle hissed softly as Tom busied himself with the tea. Miss Marple settled into a chair, her eyes wandering over the room. A calendar hung on the wall, its corners curled, marking the days of the harvest season. A pair of muddy boots stood by the door, and a small shelf held a few books, mostly farming manuals. But one caught her eye, Folktales of St. Mary Mead. The spine was cracked, as if well read. "You're fond of local stories, I see," she remarked, nodding toward the book. Tom glanced over his shoulder, his hands pausing as he poured the tea. My mum used to read 'em to me. Tales of hidden treasures and the like. Silly stuff, mostly silly, perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice light, "but sometimes old stories hold a grain of truth. Like that tale about the sparrow's nest. Ever heard it?" Tom's hand jerked, and a splash of tea spilled onto the counter. He muttered an apology, grabbing a cloth to wipe it up. Miss Marple watched, her expression serene, but her mind sharp as a needle. That reaction was no accident. "Sparrow's nest," Tom said, turning to face her, his tone too casual. "Just a story, Miss Marple. Something about a treasure hidden by the old lords to keep the village safe. Never put much stock in it." "Oh, I don't know," she said, accepting the cup he offered. "Stories have a way of lingering, don't they? Especially when they're tied to something real. Like a key, perhaps." Tom froze, his cup halfway to his lips. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel. Then he set the cup down, his movements slow, deliberate. "You've got a sharp mind, Miss Marple," he said quietly. "Always have." She smiled, her eyes crinkling. "I only notice what's there to be seen, Tom. And I couldn't help but notice you at the mill the other night. You seemed troubled." Tom's shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his graying hair. "You saw that, did you?" "Should've known better than to think I could keep anything from you." "I don't mean to pry," she said gently, though her gaze was steady. "But when a man like you looks as though he's carrying the weight of the world, it's only natural to wonder why. And that key in your pocket, it's no ordinary key. is it?" Tom stared at her, his face a mixture of resignation and fear. He leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "You're right," he said at last. "It's not ordinary, but it's not my secret to tell, Miss Marple. I swore to keep it safe." "Safe from whom?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. "The stranger at the mill, or someone else." Tom's eyes darted to the window, as if expecting to see a figure lurking beyond the glass. "Both?" he muttered. "There's people out there who do anything to get their hands on what that key unlocks. And it's not gold or jewels, Miss Marple. It's something dangerous." Her heart quickened, but she kept her expression calm, stirring her tea as if they were discussing the weather. "Dangerous how, Tom? If the village is at risk, surely you can trust me to help." He hesitated, his fingers drumming on the table. Then, with a sigh, he stood and crossed to a cupboard by the hearth. From it, he pulled a small tin box, rusted at the edges. He set it on the table and opened it, revealing a heavy iron key with an ornate handle shaped like a sparrow's wing. "This," he said, his voice low, "has been in my family for generations. My great-grandfather passed it down, told me it opens something hidden in the village. Something that could ruin St. Mary Mead if it fell into the wrong hands." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes tracing the key's intricate design. "And the sparrow's nest," she prompted. Tom's jaw tightened. "It's a code, like you thought. Points to where the thing's hidden. But I don't know the whole of it. My granddad said it was too dangerous to write down, so he only passed on bits and pieces. The rest is somewhere else." "Somewhere like that barn of yours?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild but her gaze sharp. Tom's eyes widened, and for a moment, she thought he might deny it. But then he nodded, a weary acceptance settling over him. "You don't miss much, do you? There's something in the barn. Not the key's hiding place that's safe, but a clue. I didn't want to keep it, but I didn't know what else to do." "May I see it?" she asked, setting her cup down with a soft clink. Tom hesitated, then stood. "All right. But you've got to swear not to tell a soul, Miss Marple. Not yet." "I promise," she said, and the sincerity in her voice seemed to ease his tension. They stepped outside, the morning air crisp and scented with hay and earth. The barn stood a short distance from the house, its red paint peeling, but its structure solid. Tom unlatched the door, and they stepped into the dim interior, where dust motes danced in shafts of sunlight. The air smelled of straw and old wood, with a faint tang of oil from farm tools stacked in a corner. Tom led her to a wooden beam near the back, where a small panel was cleverly disguised in the grain of the wood. He pressed it, and it popped open, revealing a hollow space. From it, he pulled a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age. He handed it to Miss Marple, who unfolded it carefully. The parchment bore a hand-drawn map. Its lines faded, but precise. It depicted St. Mary Mead, with landmarks she recognized: the church, the village hall, the mill. At the center was a sketch of a tree, its branches curling like a nest, and beside it, a series of symbols that looked like a code. Her mind raced, cataloging the details, but she kept her expression neutral. "This is what my granddad left," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said it leads to the sparrow's nest, but he warned me never to follow it unless the village was in dire need. I thought I could keep it hidden, keep everyone safe. But that stranger, he knows too much." Miss Marple's fingers traced the map's edges, her mind already working to memorize its lines. "You've done well to protect it, Tom," she said. "But secrets like this have a way of drawing trouble. That stranger at the mill, who is he to you?" Tom's face darkened. "Calls himself a historian, but I don't buy it. He came to me a week ago, asking about the key. saying he was researching old village legends, kept pressing, offering money. When I refused, he got threatening, said he'd make sure the village paid if I didn't hand it over. And at the mill, she prompted. He wanted me to bring the key to prove I had it. I didn't. I showed him my pocket knife. Instead, told him to leave me be. But he's not the only one sniffing around. I've seen other strangers in the village, watching. Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. The stranger's coded note, the key, the map all pointed to a secret that had slept in St. Mary Mead for centuries, now stirring awake. But what was it? A treasure, as the legends claimed, or something more sinister? And who else was watching? Tom, she said, her voice firm but kind. You've carried this burden alone long enough. Let me help. We'll follow this map, find the sparrow's nest, and decide what must be done. Together, he looked at her, his eyes searching for reassurance. At last, he nodded. All right, Miss Marple, I trust you. But we've got to be careful. Whoever's after this, they're not playing games. She smiled, folding the map and tucking it into her basket. Careful is my middle name, Tom. Now, let's have another cup of tea and make a plan. The rest of the morning passed in quiet discussion. Miss Marple memorized the map's details, sketching it in her mind as Tom recounted what little he knew of the legend. The sparrow's nest, he said, was tied to a time when St. Mary Mead faced ruinant invasion, a plague, or some other calamity lost to history. The key and the map were safeguards meant to protect or destroy whatever lay hidden. Depending on the need. As she left the farm, the map symbols danced in her thoughts. The tree at its center was at the ancient yew in the churchyard. The symbols beside it, could they be a cipher, like the one she decoded from the stranger's note? And who was the stranger's employer? The one pulling the strings? The village was waking now, its lanes bustling with familiar faces. Mrs. Price, the baker, waved from her shop, her apron dusted with flour. Young Tommy Bantry rode by on his bicycle, shouting a greeting. But Miss Marple's eyes lingered on the unfamiliar, a man in a dark coat lingering by the post office, his hat pulled low. He turned away as she passed, but not before she noted the sharp angle of his jaw and the way he favored his left leg, as if nursing an old injury. Back at her cottage, she sat by the window, her knitting in her lap, but her mind far from the stitches. She pulled out her notebook and began to sketch the map from memory, her pencil moving with precision. The tree, the symbols, the church, each piece was a clue, and she was determined to fit them together. But as the afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across her garden, a new thought struck her. Tom had said the secret was dangerous, something that could ruin the village. What if the sparrow's nest held not treasure, but a weapon, a relic from a darker time, meant to protect but capable of destruction? The thought chilled her, but it also sharpened her resolve. She would follow the map, uncover the truth, and protect St. Mary Mead. But first, she needed to know who else was watching and what they were willing to do to claim the secret. The day stretched into evening, and Miss Marple prepared for her next move. She slipped on her coat, tucked her notebook into her basket, and stepped into the twilight. The village was quiet now, the air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. She made her way toward the church, where the ancient yew stood, sentinel in the churchyard, its gnarled branches twisting like the map's sketch. As she approached, she heard a rustle in the bushes. Her heart quickened, but she kept her steps steady, her expression serene. "Good evening," she called softly, as if greeting a neighbor. The rustling stopped, and a figure emerged, a young woman, her face pale in the moonlight. "Miss Marple." The woman gasped, clutching a shawl around her shoulders. It was Ellie, the postmistress's niece. known for her shy demeanor and quick fingers at sorting mail. "Ellie, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice calm but her eyes alert. "What brings you out so late?" I was just walking," Ellie stammered, her eyes darting to the church. "Couldn't sleep." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was racing. Ellie's presence here, so close to the map's clue, was no coincidence. Was she another watcher, or merely caught in the web? "It's a lovely night for a walk," she said, "but do be careful, dear. The village has been rather lively of late." Ellie nodded, her hands twisting in her shawl, and hurried away. Miss Marple watched her go, then turned to the yew tree. Its branches seemed to whisper in the breeze, as if guarding their own secret. She would return tomorrow, in daylight, to search for clues. For now, she had enough to ponder and a growing sense that the sparrow's nest was closer than she'd thought. As she walked home, the stars bright above, Miss Marple felt the weight of the mystery settle around her. Tom's secret, the map, the stranger, the watchers in the shadows, each was a thread in a pattern only she could see, and she would not rest until it was complete. Chapter 7. The map's hidden path. Late afternoon sun cast long, dappled shadows across St. Mary Mead, painting the cobblestone paths in hues of amber and gold. Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest parlor, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, as her mind worked far faster than her hands. The coded map she had glimpsed in Farmer Grayson's barn consumed her thoughts, its cryptic lines and symbols forming a puzzle that begged to be solved. She had memorized every curve and dot, and now, as the village settled into the quiet hum of evening, she knew it was time to act. The map, scrawled on a weathered piece of parchment, had been tucked behind a bale of hay in Grayson's barn. Its edges frayed, but its ink still sharp. It wasn't the kind of map one might find in a schoolroom, with neat borders and labeled rivers. No, this was a riddle in itself, a series of jagged lines, cryptic runes, and a single, prominent sketch of a sparrow perched on a nest. The phrase, "Sparrow's nest," had haunted her since she first overheard it in the tea shop, and now it seemed to pulse at the heart of this mystery. The map pointed somewhere specific, somewhere in St. Mary Mead, and Miss Marple's instincts told her it was the village church's crypt. She set her knitting aside, her fingers brushing the soft wool as she rose from her armchair. Her eyes, bright and sharp despite her age, darted to the small notebook on her side table. She flipped it open, her neat handwriting filling the pages with observations, clues, and connections. The map's details were sketched there, reproduced from memory with a precision that would surprise anyone who mistook her for a frail old spinster. She traced a finger over the sparrow's nest symbol, her lips pursing thoughtfully. "The church," she murmured to herself. "It must be the crypt. But what lies within?" The village church, St. Bartholomew's, was an ancient structure, its stone walls weathered by centuries of rain and wind. Its crypt, rarely visited, was a labyrinth of shadowed alcoves and forgotten relics, a place whispered about in local lore. Miss Marple had always found such whispers more reliable than official records. Legends, after all, often held truths that history overlooked. The crypt was said to house the sparrow's nest, a term that appeared in old village tales, about a treasure or perhaps a secret guarded by the church's founders. Whatever it was, Miss Marple was certain it was tied to the nervous stranger, the coarse farmer, and the glinting key she had seen in Grayson's pocket. She glanced at the clock. It was nearing 7, and the village would soon be cloaked in dusk. The crypt would be empty at this hour, the vicar likely tending to his evening duties. It was the perfect time to investigate, though she knew the risks. Someone else was watching, someone who had followed her threads too closely. The memory of the shadowed figure in the barn, the farmer's anxious glances, and the stranger's coded note all pointed to a web of secrecy that tightened with each step she took. But Miss Marple was not one to shy away from a puzzle, especially when her village's safety hung in the balance. Slipping on her sturdy shoes and a woolen shawl, she tucked her notebook into her handbag and stepped out into the cool evening air. The village was quiet, save for the distant clatter of a cart and the soft cooing of doves in the elms. St. Mary Mead seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew something momentous was afoot. Miss Marple's steps were measured but purposeful as she made her way toward St. Bartholomew's, her eyes scanning the familiar streets for anything or anyone out of place. The church loomed ahead, its spire piercing the twilight sky. Its heavy oak doors were slightly ajar, a habit of the vicar's, to welcome latecomers for evening prayers. Miss Marple slipped inside, her footsteps muffled by the worn stone floor. The nave was empty, its pews bathed in the soft glow of stained glass windows. She paused, listening. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint creak of settling wood. Satisfied that she was alone, she moved toward the side chapel, where a narrow staircase descended to the crypt. The air grew colder as she descended, the scent of damp stone and ancient dust filling her nostrils. Her small flashlight, a practical addition to her handbag, cast a thin beam across the uneven steps. The crypt was a maze of low ceilings and shadowed niches, each holding stone sarcophagi or faded inscriptions. Miss Marple's heart quickened, not from fear but from the thrill of discovery. She had always believed that the smallest details, a misplaced thread, a hesitant glance, held the key to truth. Here, in this forgotten place, she sensed she was close to unraveling the map's secret. Her flashlight swept across the walls, searching for the sparrow's nest. The map had shown it as a central symbol, surrounded by lines that suggested a specific alcove or chamber. She moved deeper into the crypt, her eyes scanning for anything that matched the sketch. The beam caught a faint carving on a stone slab, half hidden by cobwebs. She knelt, brushing away the dust with her gloved hand. There it was, a sparrow, its wings spread, perched atop a woven nest. Below it, an inscription in Latin, its letters worn but legible, Passer nidus custodet arcana. The sparrow's nest guards the secret. Miss Marple's lips curved into a small, satisfied smile. Well, she whispered. The secret is here. She traced the carving, her mind racing. The slab was heavy, likely a cover for a hidden compartment or passage. The map had shown a star-like symbol near the sparrow, which she now noticed etched faintly to the right. It resembled a keyhole, small and unobtrusive. The key in Farmer Grayson's pocket flashed in her memory. Could it fit? She made a mental note to persuade Grayson to share it, though she suspected he would need more convincing than a simple request. As she studied the slab, a faint sound echoed through the crypt, a soft scuff, like a shoe against stone. Miss Marple froze, her flashlight dimming as she clicked it off. The darkness enveloped her, thick and oppressive. She held her breath, her ears straining. Another sound, closer now, the rustle of fabric, the faint creak of a floorboard. Someone was in the crypt with her. Her mind worked swiftly. She was alone, unarmed, and in a place he knew she had gone. But Miss Marple was no stranger to danger, and her greatest weapon was her ability to remain unnoticed. She pressed herself into a shadowed alcove, her small frame blending with the stone. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate, but cautious, as if the intruder was searching. A faint light flickered, not a flashlight, but the glow of a lantern, casting eerie shadows across the crypt's walls. Miss Marple peered from her hiding place, her eyes adjusting to the dim light. The figure was cloaked, their face obscured by a hood. They moved toward the same slab she had examined, their lantern illuminating the sparrow carving. The figure knelt, running gloved fingers over the stone, pausing at the keyhole-like mark. A low mutter escaped them, too soft for Miss Marple to catch the words, but the tone was tense, almost frustrated. She watched, her heart steady despite the situation. The figure's movements were practiced, as if they had been here before or knew exactly what to look for. They produced a small tula-thin metal pick and began probing the keyhole. The slab didn't budge, but the figure's persistence suggested they were no amateur. Miss Marple's mind cataloged details. The cloak was well made, the gloves leather, the pick professional. This was no village ruffian, but someone with resources and purpose. Suddenly, the figure stiffened, as if sensing they were not alone. They stood, lantern swinging, and Miss Marple pressed deeper into the shadows. Her shell caught on a jagged stone, and she felt a faint tug as a thread pulled loose. She held her breath, praying the sound was too soft to notice. The figure scanned the crypt, their light sweeping dangerously close to her hiding place. For a moment, she thought they would spot her, but then a distant sound, perhaps a door creaking upstairs, drew their attention. With a muttered curse, they extinguished the lantern and hurried toward the stairs. Their footsteps fading into silence, Miss Marple waited, counting to 100 before stepping out. Her flashlight flicked on, and she examined the slab again. The pick had left a faint scratch near the keyhole, confirming its importance. She needed that key, and she needed to know who the cloaked figure was. The postmistress's nervous glances, the shopkeeper's limp, the stranger's coated no-tall were pieces of a puzzle that now included this midnight intruder. Someone in St. Mary Mead was a traitor, and they were closer to the secret than she had realized. She made her way back to the stairs, her mind buzzing with possibilities. The cloaked figure's haste suggested they would return, likely with the key or another tool. Miss Marple had to act quickly. She emerged into the church, the nave now bathed in moonlight through the stained glass windows. As she stepped outside, the cool night air greeted her, and she paused to listen. The village was silent, but her instincts told her it was a deceptive calm. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a single lamp and spread her notebook on the table. She sketched the crypt's layout, marking the slab's location and the sparrow carving. The Latin inscription nagged at her, Passer nidus custodet arcana. The secret could be anything: a treasure, a weapon, a document, but its protection had drawn dangerous attention to her quiet village. She thought of Farmer Grayson, his anxious eyes and hidden key. He was protecting something, but from whom? The stranger, the cloaked figure, or someone yet to reveal themselves. The next morning, Miss Marple visited the village library, a small room tucked behind the post office. Mrs. Cleary, the librarian, greeted her with a warm smile, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the village's surface. "Good morning, Miss Marple. Looking for something particular today?" "Oh, just a bit of history." "Mrs. Cleary," Miss Marple replied, her tone light. "Anything on St. Bartholomew's crypt, perhaps? Old records, legends, that sort of thing." Mrs. Cleary's eyes lit up. "The crypt, oh, it's full of stories. There's a book rather dusty. Mind you about the church's founding. Let me fetch it." She bustled off, returning with a leather-bound volume titled Chronicles of St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple settled into a corner, her glasses perched on her nose as she scanned the pages. The book was a treasure trove of village lore, detailing the church's construction in the 14th century by a secretive order of monks. One passage caught her eye. In the crypt, the sparrow's nest was carved to guard a sacred trust, known only to the chosen. Its key, wrought in iron, was passed from guardian to guardian, lest the secret fall into unworthy hands. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The key again. Farmer Grayson was no monk. but he might be a guardian of sorts, chosen or coerced. The book mentioned no specifics about the sacred trust, but the monk's secrecy suggested it was no mere trinket. She closed the book, thanking Mrs. Cleary, and made her way to the vicarage. The vicar, Mr. Clement, was a kind but absent-minded man, more interested in sermons than crypts. Still, he might know something. She found him in his garden, pruning roses. Miss Marple. What a pleasant surprise, he said, wiping his brow. Care for some tea, perhaps later. Mr. Clement, she replied, her smile disarming. I was wondering about the church crypt. Have you ever explored it? Any old keys or carvings down there? His eyes widened slightly, then darted away. The crypt, it's a damp, dreary place. I haven't been down in years. Keys, you. Say, there's an old box in the vestry with some odds and ends, but I doubt it's what you're after. Miss Marple nodded, noting his unease. Just curiosity, you know. Village history is so fascinating. She chatted a bit longer, steering the conversation to mundane matters, but her mind was elsewhere. The vicar's nervousness was a clue in itself. Did he know about the key? Or was he simply uncomfortable with her questions? That afternoon, she visited Farmer Grayson's farm, her approach as casual as a neighborly call. Grayson was in his field, mending a fence. His face tightened when he saw her, but he managed a nod. Miss Marple, what brings you out here? A walk, Mr. Grayson, she said, her tone gentle, and a bit of a chat. If you've time. I've been thinking about that old chest in the village hall. Locked tight, isn't it? Ever heard of a key that might fit it? His hammer paused mid-swing, and his eyes flicked to her, wary. Just don't know much about that. Village relics aren't my concern. But you're a man who notices things, she pressed, her voice soft but firm, like that map. In your barn. Quite a curious thing, with that sparrow's nest. I wonder if it points to the church crypt. Grayson's face paled, and he set the hammer down. You've been in my barn, only to admire your fine hay, she said, her smile unwavering. But maps have a way of catching the eye, don't they? I think you're protecting something. Mr. Grayson. Something important. And I like to help. He hesitated, his hands clenching. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. You're too sharp, Miss Marple. I've got a key. Been in my family for generations. My granddad said it was for something in the church. Something dangerous. I hid the map to keep it safe. But someone's been sniffing around. I don't know who to trust. You can trust me, she said simply. Show me the key, and let's find out what it guards. Together. Grayson studied her, then nodded. He led her to the barn, pulling a small iron key from a tin box hidden beneath a floorboard. It was old, its surface pitted but sturdy, with a star-shaped head that matched the map symbol. Miss Marple's heart quickened. This is it, she said. Will you come to the crypt with me tonight? He shook his head. I've done my part. You take it. But be careful, Miss Marple. There's eyes everywhere. She tucked the key into her handbag, her mind already planning her return to the crypt. The cloaked figure, the vicar's unease. Grayson's fear all pointed to a secret that someone was desperate to claim. As she walked home, the village seemed to watch her, its familiar streets hiding shadows she had yet to uncover. That night, Miss Marple returned to St. Bartholomew's, the key a comforting weight in her pocket. The church was dark, the vicar long gone. She descended to the crypt, her flashlight steady. The sparrow carving gleamed in the beam, and she fitted the key into the star-shaped hole. It turned with a soft click, and the slab shifted, revealing a narrow passage. Her breath caught. The passage was tight, its walls rough-hewn. She squeezed through, her shawl brushing the stone. At the end was a small chamber, its walls etched with more sparrow symbols. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and atop it, a small iron box. Miss Marple approached, her fingers trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. Inside was a vial, its glass dark and heavy, filled with a crimson liquid. A label, faded but readable, bore the words, Sanguis Passeris, sparrow's blood. Before she could examine it further, a noise echoed behind her, a sharp scrape, like metal on stone. She spun, her flashlight catching a glimpse of a cloaked figure in the passage. The same figure from the night before. They lunged forward, a glint of steel in their hand. Miss Marple stepped back, her mind racing. She clutched the vial, her voice calm but firm. I know you're there. Show yourself. The figure hesitated, then stepped into the light. The hood fell back, revealing the postmistress, Mrs. Hargreaves. Her face twisted with desperation. Give me the vial, Miss Marple, she said, her voice trembling. You don't know what it's worth. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, but her tone remained gentle. I think I do, Mrs. Hargreaves. And I think you've been watching me for someone else. Who is it? The postmistress faltered, her knife lowering. I didn't want this, she whispered. They paid me to watch, to report. But I didn't. No, it would come to this. Before Miss Marple could press further, a shout echoed from the crypt's entrance. Footsteps pounded, and the postmistress fled, disappearing into the shadows. Miss Marple tucked the vial into her handbag, her heart pounding but her resolve unshaken. She had the secret now, but the danger was far from over. She emerged from the crypt, the church silent once more. The vial was a mystery, its crimson contents a riddle she would solve. But first, she needed to know who had bribed Mrs. Hargreaves, and why the sparrow's blood was worth killing for. As she stepped into the night, St. Mary Mead seemed to close ranks around her, its secrets buried but not forgotten. Miss Marple's tiny observation had led her this far, and she would follow it to the end. Chapter 8. The village spied late afternoon sun cast long, golden fingers across St. Mary Mead, painting the cobblestone paths and thatched roofs with a warm glow. Miss Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythm as steady as her thoughts. Her eyes, sharp as ever behind their spectacles, drifted to the street below, where villagers bustled about their evening routines. The postmistress, Mrs. Clara Henshaw, hurried past, her arms clutching a stack of envelopes, her face pinched with an unease that Miss Marple had noted for days. It was no coincidence, she thought, that Clara's nervous glances had grown more frequent since the stranger's arrival in the village. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her mind turning over the clues she'd gathered. The cryptic conversation in the tea shop, the stranger's coded note, the farmer's key, the glint of a dropped buttonet all pointed to a web of secrecy spun around the sparrow's nest. And now, her quiet observation at the church crypt had revealed a new thread. Clara Henshaw, the postmistress, lurking in the shadows, her eyes darting with guilt. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. The village spy, she mused. But spies, she knew, were rarely masters of their own game. They were pawns, nudged by greed or fear. And Clara's trembling hands betrayed a woman caught in a trap not of her own making. Rising from her chair, Miss Marple smoothed her tweed skirt and adjusted her hat. She would pay Clara a visit, not with accusation, but with the gentle persistence that had unraveled many a village secret. She stepped into the cool evening air, her walking stick tapping lightly on the path. The village was alive with the hum of routine Mrs. Baker sweeping, her porch, children chasing a ball down the lane, and the distant clink of teacups from the tea shop. Yet beneath it all, Miss Marple sensed a current of unease, as if St. Mary Mead itself held its breath. The post office was a quaint stone building, its window adorned with a faded sign reading Henshaw's Post and Parcels. Inside, Clara stood, behind the counter, sorting letters with a mechanical haste. Her graying hair was pinned tightly, but stray wisps betrayed her agitation. As the bell above the door chimed, Clara's head snapped up, her eyes widening at the sight of Miss Marple. "Good evening, Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice warm but laced with a quiet authority. "I thought I'd stop by for a stamp or two, and perhaps a chat." Clara's hands fumbled, a letter slipping to the floor. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't expect you. Stamps, of course. How many?" Her voice was too bright, her smile too tight. Miss Marple stepped closer, her gaze soft but unyielding. "Just one, dear. Though I must say, you seem rather preoccupied. Is everything all right?" Clara's fingers trembled as she opened the stamp drawer. "Oh, quite all right, thank you. Just busy, you know. Always so much to do." She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked in the air. Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes catching the flicker of panic in Clara's. "Busy indeed," she said gently. "I couldn't help but notice you at the church last night, near the crypt. It's an odd place for a stroll, isn't it?" Clara froze, her hand hovering over the stamps. The color drained from her face, leaving her as pale as the envelopes scattered across the counter. "The church?" she stammered. I wasn't there, Miss Marple. You must be mistaken." "Oh, my eyes aren't what they used to be," Miss Marple said with a self-deprecating chuckle. "But I do recall a figure in a green shawl, much like the one hanging by your door. And the way you hurried off when you heard a noise, well, it seemed you didn't want to be seen." Clara's mouth opened, then closed, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She gripped the counter's edge, her knuckles white. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "Clara, my dear, I've known you since you were a girl. You've always been honest, kind. But something's troubling you, isn't it? Something or someone has put you in a difficult spot. Why don't you tell me? I might be able to help." The postmistress's eyes darted to the window, then back to Miss Marple. For a moment, silence hung heavy, broken only by the distant bark of a dog. Then, like a dam breaking, Clara's resolve crumbled. She sank onto a stool, her hands covering her face. "Oh, Miss Marple," she whispered, "I've done something dreadful. I didn't mean to, I swear. But I had no choice, Miss." Marple pulled a chair close and sat, her hands folded calmly in her lap. "Start at the beginning, Clara. Whatever it is, we'll sort it out together." Clara drew a shuddering breath, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. "It started a week ago," she said. "A man came to the post office stall with a sharp face and cold eyes. He said his name was Mr. Finch, but I don't think that's true. He knew things, Miss Marple, things about my brother, Tom, in London. Tom's been in trouble, you see, debts he can't pay. This man said he'd clear Tom's debts if I helped him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression encouraging but unsurprised. "And what did this Mr. Finch ask you to do?" Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "He wanted me to watch the stranger, the one staying at the vicarage. Said he was dangerous, that he was after something valuable in the village. I was to report everything he did, everywhere he went, and any letters he sent or received." She swallowed hard. "He gave me money, Miss Marple, £50. I've never seen so much. I sent it to Tom straight away, but now I'm into deep." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her face remained kind. And the crypt? What were you doing there? Clara hesitated, her fingers plucking at her apron. Mr. Finch told me to follow the stranger that night. He said he'd be at the church, looking for something. I saw him go into the crypt, and I got too close. I didn't mean to spy on you, Miss Marple. I swear. I was just so scared of what Mr. Finch might do if I didn't obey. Miss Marple's mind raced, fitting this new piece into the puzzle. Clara, poor Clara, had been ensnared by a man who knew how to exploit desperation. But there was more to this Mr. Finch than simple coercion. His interest in the stranger and the sparrow's nest suggested a deeper game, one that threatened the village itself. Did Mr. Finch mention anything specific about what the stranger was looking for? Miss Marple asked. Clara nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. He called it the sparrow's treasure, said it was hidden somewhere in the village, and the stranger knew where. But yesterday, he gave me something else, a letter. He told me to hold onto it and not open it unless he said so. It's coded, Miss Marple, full of numbers and symbols I don't understand. He said it's about a delivery, something happening tonight. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face betrayed nothing. A coded letter about a delivery, likely the same package she'd overheard at the mill. The threads were converging, and the timing was no accident. Where is this letter, Clara? She asked softly. Clara hesitated, then reached under the counter, pulling out a small, sealed envelope. Its edges were worn, as if it had been handled often. She slid it across to Miss Marple, who took it with a nod. The envelope was unmarked, but its weight suggested a single sheet inside. Miss Marple tucked it into her handbag, her mind already turning to the task of decoding it. You've done the right thing, Clara, she said, her voice firm but kind. But you mustn't tell Mr. Finch we've spoken. Not a word. Can you do that? Clara nodded, her face a mix of relief and fear. I'll try, Miss Marple. But he's dangerous. If he finds out, he won't, Miss Marple said with quiet certainty. Now, go about your work as usual. And if Mr. Finch contacts you, let me know at once. You know where to find me. As Miss Marple left the post office, the evening air felt sharper, charged with the weight of what she'd learned. Clara's confession had confirmed her suspicions. The village was a chessboard, and someone, Mr. Finch, perhaps was moving pieces in the dark. The coded letter in her handbag was the next move, and she would need to act quickly. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp and spread the letter on her dining table. The paper was thin, the ink black and precise, filled with rows of numbers and symbols that seemed to dance under her gaze. She recognized the pattern at once, a substitution cipher, not unlike one she'd encountered years ago in a case involving a stolen brooch. Fetching her notebook, she began to work, her pencil scratching softly as she tested combinations. Hours passed, the village sinking into silence outside her window. The cipher was stubborn, but Miss Marple's patience was endless. At last, the message emerged, each word a spark in the darkness. Delivery tonight. Sparrow's Nest. Village. Square. Midnight. Miss Marple leaned back, her heart steady but her mind alight. The village square at midnight, a bold move, out in the open where anyone might see. Whoever this Mr. Finch was, he was confident, perhaps too confident. And the sparrow's nest again, always that phrase. Like a refrain in a song she didn't yet fully understand. She glanced at the clock. 10 o'clock. 2 hours until the delivery. She would need to be there, unseen, to witness what transpired. But the village square was exposed, surrounded by shops and cottages, with little cover for an observer. She thought of the old oak tree near the square's edge, its branches thick enough to conceal a small figure like herself. Yes, that would do. Miss Marple bundled herself in a dark shawl, her movements brisk but silent. She slipped out of her cottage, locking the door behind her, and made her way through the village. The streets were empty now, the windows glowing with the soft light of evening fires. She kept to the shadows, her stick tapping lightly, her senses alert for any sound. The village square was a wide, open space, its center marked by a stone fountain where children played on sunny days. Tonight, it was still, the moonlight casting stark shadows across the cobblestones. Miss Marple settled behind the oak, her small frame blending into the darkness. She adjusted her shawl, her eyes scanning the square for movement. At 5 minutes to midnight, a figure emerged from the alley beside the butcher's shop, tall, cloaked, moving with a purpose that sent a chill through Miss Marple's veins. The figure paused by the fountain, glancing around, then set a small package on it. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The package was no larger than a book, wrapped in brown paper, unremarkable but for the care with which it was placed. Another figure appeared, this one familiar, the farmer, Mr. Harrow, his broad shoulders hunched with tension. He approached the fountain, his steps hesitant, as if drawn against his will. The cloaked figure spoke, their voice low but sharp, carrying across the still night. "You're late, Harrow," the voice said, clipped and cold. Miss Marple strained to hear, her memory snagging on something familiar in the tone. "Did you bring it?" Harrow's voice was gruff, edged with defiance. "I told you. I don't have it. I won't be part of this." The cloaked figure stepped closer, their shadow looming. "You will, or your farm goes under. You know what's at stake." Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her stick. Blackmail, then. Harrow was being coerced, just as Clara had been. But what was the package, and why the village square, so exposed? Her eyes flicked to the package, still untouched on the fountain's edge. It was a lure. She realized a test to see if Harrow would comply. Harrow shook his head, his voice rising. "You'll not drag me into your filth. Take your package and leave." The cloaked figure laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You're a fool, Harrow, but I'll give you one more chance. Tomorrow night, same time, same place, bring the key or you'll regret it." The figure turned, slipping back into the alley with a speed that startled Miss Marple. Harrow stood frozen, staring at the package as if it might bite. Then, with a curse, he grabbed it and strode toward his barn, his footsteps echoing in the night. Miss Marple waited, her breath slow and steady, until the square was silent again. She emerged from her hiding place, her mind racing. The package was likely a decoy, meant to pressure Harrow into delivering the key to the chest in the crypt. She was certain. And the cloaked figure, that voice, she'd heard it before, in the tea shop, among the whispers about the sparrow's nest. Mr. Finch, or someone working for him. She made her way home, her steps quick but careful. The village was asleep, but danger stirred in its shadows. The coded letter, the package, the threats all pointed to a plan nearing its climax. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She would be ready, back in her cottage. She lit another lamp and opened her notebook, adding the night's events in her neat, precise hand. The village spy had given her a key, not of metal, but of knowledge, Clara's confession, the coded letter, and now the midnight delivery was a step closer to the truth. But the sparrow's nest remained elusive, a riddle wrapped in the village's secrets. As she closed her notebook, Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet resolve. Tomorrow night, she would be in the square again, watching, listening, her tiny observations weaving a net to catch a traitor. St. Mary Mead was her home, and she would protect it, one careful step at a time. Chapter 9. The midnight delivery night was heavy with the scent of late summer, the air thick with the promise of rain. St. Mary Mead lay cloaked in silence, its cobblestone lanes and thatched cottages bathed in the pale glow of a harvest moon. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in a dark shawl, stood concealed behind a gnarled oak at the edge of the village square. Her eyes, sharp as ever despite the late hour, scanned the shadows for movement. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear but with the quiet thrill of unraveling a puzzle. Tonight, the pieces were falling into place. She had chosen her vantage point with care. The oak stood just beyond the square, near enough to observe the farmer's barn, but far enough to avoid detection. The barn, weathered and leaning slightly as if tired from years of use, was the focal point of her attention earlier that day. The postmistress's trembling confession had revealed a coded letter, mentioning a delivery set for midnight. Miss Marple had deciphered its meaning quickly. A package, likely tied to the mysterious treasure of the sparrow's nest, was to be hidden in the barn under cover of darkness. Who would bring it, and why, remained unclear, but she was determined to find out. The village clock struck 11:30, its chimes rolling softly across the square. Miss Marple adjusted her shawl, her fingers brushing the small notebook tucked in her pocket. In it, she had scribbled every clue: the cryptic phrase from the tea shop, the stranger's coded note, the farmer's key, the ancient chest, and now this midnight rendezvous. Each fragment pointed to a larger scheme, one that threatened the peace of St. Mary Mead. She felt the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a challenge to her keen mind. A faint rustle broke her thoughts. Her eyes darted to the lane leading from the high street. A figure emerged, cloaked and hooded, moving with deliberate steps toward the barn. The moonlight caught the edge of the cloak, revealing a slight limp in the figure's gait. Miss Marple's lips tightened. She knew that limp, it belonged to Mr. Harrow, the village shopkeeper, whose genial smile and quick wit masked a restless ambition. She had suspected his involvement after noticing his furtive glances at the farmer's barn earlier that week, but seeing him now, skulking like a thief, confirmed her suspicions. Harrow paused at the barn door, glancing over his shoulder. Satisfied he was alone, he slipped inside, leaving the door ajar. Miss Marple waited, counting her breaths to steady her nerves. She had no intention of confronting him, not yet. Her strength lay in observation, in piecing together the unseen threads of human behavior. She needed to know what he was delivering and to whom. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching taut as a bowstring. Then a second figure appeared, this one taller and broader, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to command. The moonlight revealed a flash of silver at his waist, a belt buckle, ornate and out of place in the rustic village. Miss Marple's mind raced. She had seen that buckle before, on the stranger who had visited the vicarage, the so-called historian who had fled after her gentle probing. His return suggested he was more than a hired investigator. Perhaps he was the mastermind, or at least a key player. The stranger entered the barn, and low voices drifted through the open door. Miss Marple crept closer, her soft-soled shoes silent on the grass. She crouched behind a stack of hay bales, close enough to hear, but hidden from view. The voices were hushed, urgent, laced with tension. "You're late," Harrow hissed. "I don't like being kept waiting, not with half the village snooping about." "Calm yourself," the stranger replied, his tone smooth but edged with impatience. "The package is here, as promised." "Did you bring the key?" Harrow's voice dropped lower. "I've got it, but I'm not handing it over till I know what's in this for me. You said this'd make me rich, but all I've seen is risk." Miss Marple's breath caught. The key, the one she had seen glinting in the farmer's pocket at the mill, the one that likely unlocked the ancient chest in the village hall. Harrow must have coerced or stolen it from the farmer. Her mind whirred, connecting the dots, the chest, the treasure, the sparrow's nest. But what was this package, and why was it so vital? The stranger chuckled, a sound that sent a chill down Miss Marple's spine. You'll get your share, Harrow. The contents of that chest will fetch a fortune on the black market. But first, we secure the package. Open the trapdoor. A scrape of wood against wood followed, and Miss Marple pictured a hidden compartment in the barn floor. She leaned forward, straining to hear. Harrow muttered something unintelligible, then said, "It's done. The package is safe. Now what? Now we wait," the stranger said. "The buyer arrives tomorrow. Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open. If anyone gets too curious, especially that meddling old woman, deal with it." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Meddling old woman, indeed. She had been called worse, but it always amused her how villains underestimated her. She filed the remark away, along with the mention of a buyer. The plot was thickening, and the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. The barn door creaked open, and Harrow emerged, his limp more pronounced in his haste. He clutched a small satchel, likely containing the key or some other incriminating item. The stranger followed, pausing to scan the square. Miss Marple pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart steady despite the danger. The stranger's gaze lingered, as if sensing her presence, but he turned and vanished into the lane. Miss Marple waited until the silence returned, then slipped from her hiding place. She needed to see the package. The barn door was still ajar, and she moved swiftly, her slight frame gliding through the gap. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of hay and old wood. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the walls, casting eerie patterns on the floor. She spotted the trapdoor at once, its edges barely visible under a scattering of straw. Kneeling, she brushed the straw aside and tested the handle. It was unlocked, a careless mistake, or perhaps a sign of Harrow's nerves. She lifted the trapdoor, revealing a shallow compartment. Nestled within was a small, leather-bound case, no larger than a book. Her fingers hesitated. Opening it could be risky, but leaving it meant letting the plot unfold unchecked. With a steady hand, she unlatched the case. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. She peeled back the layers, revealing a glint of glass vial, small and unassuming, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. Her breath caught. The sparrow's blood, perhaps the ancient poison rumored to be hidden in the chest, a relic of a time when villages guarded deadly secrets. If this was indeed the treasure, its value on the black market would be immense and its danger even greater. She rewrapped the vial and closed the case, her mind racing. Harrow and the stranger planned to sell it, likely to the mysterious buyer, arriving tomorrow. But who was this buyer, and what did they intend to do with such a substance? She needed more information, and she needed it before the transaction could take place. A sudden noise, a creak from the barn's far corner, made her freeze. She replaced the case and lowered the trapdoor, scattering straw to cover her tracks. Slipping behind a stack of crates, she peered into the darkness. A shadow moved, slow and deliberate. Not Harrow or the stranger, this was someone else. Her pulse quickened, but she remained still, her years of quiet observation serving her well. The shadow resolved into a figure. Mrs. Tuttle, the baker's wife, her face pale in the moonlight. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Mrs. Tuttle was known for her gossip, not her stealth. Yet here she was, creeping through the barn, her eyes darting nervously. She approached the trapdoor, hesitated, then knelt and opened it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the case, muttering to herself, "If they find out, I'm done for." Miss Marple's mind whirled. Was Mrs. Tuttle another conspirator? Or had she stumbled into the plot by chance? Her muttering suggested fear, not greed. Perhaps she had been coerced, like the farmer, or bribed, like the postmistress. Miss Marple decided to act. Mrs. Tuttle, she said softly, stepping into the moonlight. The woman gasped, nearly dropping the case. Her eyes widened, and she clutched the case to her chest. Miss Marple, I didn't see you, she stammered. I was just looking for something. Miss Marple's tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. Perhaps you'd like to tell me why you're here at this hour, handling such a curious item, Mrs. Tuttle's shoulders sagged, and tears welled in her eyes. I didn't want to, Miss Marple, I swear. He made me, said he'd ruin my husband's business if I didn't help. Who? Miss Marple asked, though she suspected the answer. Harrow. Mrs. Tuttle whispered. He's been watching everyone, making threats. Said I had to check the package was here, or else. Miss Marple nodded, her suspicions confirmed. Harrow was weaving a web of coercion, using fear to control the villagers. But why involve Mrs. Tuttle? And what was his endgame? She placed a reassuring hand on the woman's arm. You've done no harm yet, my dear. Put the case back, and we'll sort this out together. Mrs. Tuttle obeyed, her hands shaking as she replaced the case and closed the trapdoor. Miss Marple guided her outside, her mind already planning the next move. Harrow was the key to unraveling this, not just his actions, but his motives. She needed to follow him, to overhear his plans, and she needed to do it without arousing his suspicion. Go home, Mrs. Tuttle, Miss Marple said kindly. Say nothing of this to anyone. I'll handle Mr. Harrow. Mrs. Tuttle nodded, her relief palpable, and hurried off into the night. Miss Marple lingered by the barn, her eyes tracing the lane where Harrow had disappeared. His limp would make him easy to track, but she needed to be cautious. He was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. She set off, keeping to the shadows, her steps light and purposeful. The lane wound past the church and toward Harrow's shop, its windows dark but for a faint glow in the back room. She circled to the rear, where a narrow alley offered cover. Peering through a cracked window, she saw Harrow hunched over a desk, scribbling in a ledger. The satchel lay open beside him, revealing the glint of the key and a stack of banknotes. Another figure entered the room, a woman, her face obscured by a scarf. Miss Marple strained to hear their conversation, catching only fragments. Buyer tomorrow. Crypt, no mistakes. The woman's voice was sharp, commanding, unlike Harrow's nervous tone. Was she the buyer, or another intermediary? Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing together the hierarchy of the plot. Harrow was a pawn, manipulated by someone higher up, perhaps the stranger, perhaps this woman. The conversation ended abruptly, and the woman left through a side door. Harrow slumped in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Miss Marple noted his exhaustion, his fear. He was in over his head, and that made him unpredictable, but also vulnerable. She could use that. She retreated to the square, her notebook, now heavy with new observations, the vial, Mrs. Tuttle's coercion, the mysterious woman, and Harrow's ledger. The puzzle was nearly complete. But the final pieces, the buyer's identity and the treasure's true purpose, remained elusive. Tomorrow, at the crypt, the truth would come to light. For now, she returned home, her mind alight with possibilities, her heart steady with the certainty that she would protect her village. As she slipped into her cottage, the clock struck 1. Miss Marple lit a candle, opened her notebook, and began to write. Her neat handwriting capturing every detail of the midnight delivery. The village slept, unaware of the danger lurking in its heart. But Miss Marple was wide awake, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 10. The shopkeepers betray Alth. Morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil. softening the edges of the village's quaint cottages and winding lanes. Miss Jane Marple sat in her modest parlor, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, though her mind was far from the soft wool in her hands. Her sharp eyes, framed by delicate spectacles, darted occasionally to the window, where the world outside seemed deceptively serene. The events of the past days, the cryptic whispers in the tea shop, the coded note, the glinting key, and the midnight delivery had woven a tapestry of intrigue that demanded her attention. Now, her focus rested on one figure, Mr. Clarence Tuttle, the village shopkeeper, whose cloaked silhouette and telltale limp had betrayed him in the moonlight. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, smoothing her lavender skirt with a practiced hand. She had seen many betrayals in her long life, often in the unlikeliest of hearts. Tuttle, with his jovial smile and endless chatter about the price of flour, had always seemed a pillar of the community. Yet, last night's discovery that he was entangled in a scheme to steal the mysterious treasure tied to the sparrow's nest had shifted her perception. His ledger, glimpsed in the shadows of his shop, hinted at payments for spying, and his limp had confirmed his identity as the cloaked figure. But Miss Marple was not one to act on impulse. She needed to confront him, to unravel his motives, and, if possible, to turn his betrayal into an opportunity to protect the village. She rose, adjusting her shawl, and stepped into the crisp morning air. The village square was already stirring, with children chasing a stray dog and Mrs. Price from the bakery sweeping her stoop. Miss Marple's destination was Tuttle's general store, a squat building with a faded green awning and a bell that jingled cheerfully as she entered. The shop smelled of soap and barley, with shelves stacked high with jars of preserves, bolts of fabric, and tins of biscuits. Behind the counter, Tuttle was polishing a brass scale, his round face flushed with the effort. "Good morning, Mr. Tuttle," Miss Marple said, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze, though her eyes missed nothing, the slight twitch in his cheek, the way his hands fumbled with the cloth. "Miss Marple, a pleasure, as always," Tuttle replied, his smile wide but not quite reaching his eyes. "What can I do for you today? A bit of tea, perhaps, or some of those lemon drops you're fond of?" She smiled, tilting her head as if considering. "Oh, perhaps a small tin of tea, but I'm really here for something else. A matter of curiosity." Tuttle's hands stilled. "Curiosity, you say? Well, I'm always happy to help with a puzzle." His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the tightness in his jaw. She stepped closer to the counter, her small frame radiating quiet authority. "I was out for a walk last night, Mr. Tuttle, under the harvest moon. Such a lovely sight, though it does reveal things one might not expect. A cloaked figure, for instance, moving through the shadows near Mr. Harrow's barn." Tuttle's smile faltered, and his fingers gripped the cloth tightly. "A cloaked figure? Sounds like something out of a novel, Miss Marple. People do wander about at odd hours, don't they?" "Indeed," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "But this figure had a distinctive limp, one I've seen before. And there was a package, delivered in secret. It made me wonder about our loyalties." The shopkeeper's face paled, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint creak of the floorboards. Then, with a forced laugh, he said, "You've always had a sharp eye, Miss Marple. But I'm afraid you're weaving a tale out of nothing. I was home last night, fast asleep." Miss Marple's smile remained serene. "Oh, I don't doubt you were home at some point, Mr. Tuttle. But I also saw a ledger, left open in your back room, with entries that seemed unusual. Payments, perhaps, for services beyond selling tea and biscuits." Tuttle's eyes widened, and he took a step back, bumping into a shelf. A tin of peas wobbled but did not fall. "You've been in my shop. Without my knowing. Not at all, she said, raising a hand as if to dismiss the idea. I merely glanced through the window last evening. On my way home, the moonlight, as I said, reveals much, and I couldn't help but notice those figures in your ledger. Payments from someone outside the village. Perhaps. The shopkeeper's shoulders slumped, and he ran a hand through his thinning hair. The jovial mask he wore for customers was gone, replaced by a look of weary resignation. You don't miss a thing, do you, Miss Marple? He said, his voice low. I suppose there's no point denying it. You've caught me. Miss Marple's expression softened, but her gaze remained steady. I'm not here to accuse, Mr. Tuttle. I'm here to understand. Tell me your story, and perhaps we can find a way to make things right. Tuttle hesitated, glancing toward the shop's door as if expecting someone to burst in. Then, with a heavy sigh, he gestured to a stool behind the counter. You'd better sit, Miss Marple. This isn't a short tale. She took the stool, folding her hands in her lap, her demeanor calm but attentive. Tuttle leaned against the counter, his voice barely above a whisper. It started 6 months ago. A man came to the shop, late, after closing. He called himself Mr. Black, not his real name, I'm sure. He was polished, city type, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes. Said he was looking for something valuable hidden in St. Mary Mead. The Sparrow's Nest, he called it. Offered me money to keep an eye out, to report anything unusual. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already piecing together connections. And you agreed. Tuttle looked down, shame etching lines into his face. I didn't think it'd come to much. The shop's been struggling people buying from the city now, not here. He offered enough to keep the lights on, maybe more. All I had to do was listen, pass on bits of gossip. Didn't seem like harm at first, but it grew, she prompted gently. He nodded, his voice tightening. He started asking for more. Wanted me to follow people, like that stranger who came to the vicarage. Wanted me to sneak around, check barns and cellars. Then, last week, he told me about the package. Said it was part of the treasure, and I was to deliver it to the barn under cover of night. I didn't want to, Miss Marple, I swear. But he threatened me. Threatened how? She asked, her tone as steady as a vicar's sermon. Tuttle's hands shook as he spoke. Said he knew things about me. Old debts, a few mistakes from years back. Said he'd ruin me. Tell the village I'd been cheating customers. I've got a family, Miss Marple. My daughter's at school. My wife's not well. I couldn't let it all fall apart. Miss Marple's heart softened, though her mind remained razor sharp. She had seen fear drive good people to bad choices before. And the ledger, she asked. Payments from him, Tuttle admitted. He paid me in cash. Always at night. I kept track. Thought maybe I could use it against him if it came to that. But I was in too deep. Last night, I delivered that package like he told me. Didn't even know what was in it, just a small box, wrapped tight. Miss Marple's mind raced. The package, likely tied to the Sparrow's Nest, could be the key to the treasure or something far more dangerous. She leaned forward. Slightly. Mr. Tuttle, do you know who this Mr. Black works for? Or what he plans to do with the treasure? Tuttle shook his head. He never said. But he's not alone. I've heard him on the phone, talking to someone he calls the boss. Sounded like they're planning to take whatever it is and leave the village in the dust. I heard him mention a buyer, someone willing to pay a fortune. Miss Marple's lips pursed. A buyer suggested the treasure was not just a local relic, but something of broader significance. Perhaps the ancient vial hinted at in the village's legends, a relic of poison or power. And where is Mr. Black now? She asked. He's staying at the Blue Boar Inn, in the next town over. Tuttle said, comes and goes, always at odd hours. I'm supposed to meet him tonight. Give him a report on the package. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with a quiet resolve. Here was her chance not just to stop Tuttle, but to outmaneuver the mysterious Mr. Black and his unseen employer. Mr. Tuttle, she said, her voice firm but kind, you've made a mistake, but it's not too late to make it right. I need your help to protect this village. Will you trust me? Tuttle looked at her, his eyes searching for judgment but finding only compassion. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Meet Mr. Black as planned, she said. But tell him the package was misplaced. Say it was stolen from the barn before you could secure it. Buy us time. Meanwhile, I'll ensure the package is safe and uncover what it holds. Can you do that? Tuttle swallowed hard, then nodded. I'll do it. I don't want to hurt the village, Miss Marple. I never did. I know, she said softly, rising from the stool. You're a good man, Mr. Tuttle, caught in a bad moment. We'll sort this out together. As she left the shop, the bell jingling behind her, Miss Marple's mind was already racing ahead. The package in the barn needed to be retrieved before Mr. Black grew suspicious. She would need to enlist Mr. Harrow, the farmer, whose anxious demeanor suggested he knew more than he'd let on, and she would need to tread carefully. Mr. Black's threats indicated a man who would not hesitate to act ruthlessly. The day unfolded with a quiet intensity. Miss Marple visited Mr. Harrow at his farm, finding him mending a fence in the late morning sun. His broad shoulders were tense, and his eyes darted nervously as she approached. Miss Marple, he greeted, wiping sweat from his brow. Didn't expect to see you out here. I often take walks, she said lightly, though her gaze was keen. I was wondering about that barn of yours, Mr. Harrow. It's such an old structure, full of history. Have you noticed anything unusual there? Lately, Harrow's hammer paused mid-swing. Unusual? Not sure what you mean, Miss Marple. Just hay and tools in there. She smiled, undeterred. Perhaps a package left in the night. I understand you've been under some pressure, Mr. Harrow. I saw you at the mill, speaking with a stranger. You seemed uneasy. Harrow's face darkened, and he set the hammer down. You've been watching me, then not watching. She corrected gently, observing. There's a difference. I know you're protecting something, perhaps out of fear, but I also know you care for this village. Let me help you. Harrow's shoulders sagged, much like Tuttle's had. It's true, he admitted. A man came to me, said I had to hide a package in the barn. Said if I didn't, there'd be trouble not just for me, but for my family. I didn't want any part of it, but I didn't see a way out. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of quiet understanding. And the package is still there, he hesitated, then nodded. In the loft, under some old sacks. I didn't look inside, didn't want to know. Then let's look together, she said firmly. If it's dangerous, we need to know. And if it's part of the sparrow's nest business, we need to keep it out of the wrong hands. Harrow led her to the barn, its weathered boards creaking as they entered. The air was thick with the scent of hay and earth in the loft, hidden beneath a pile of burlap sacks. They found a small wooden box, no larger than a loaf of bread, bound with twine and sealed with wax. Miss Marple's delicate fingers traced the seal, noting a faint symbol etched into it, a sparrow, its wings spread. It's locked, Harrow said, his voice low. I don't have the key. I suspect I know who does, Miss Marple murmured, thinking of the glinting metal in Harrow's pocket at the mill. For now, we'll keep this safe. Can you hide it somewhere else, somewhere no one would look? Harrow nodded. There's a hollow in the oak by the stream. I can put it there. Cover it with moss. Good, she said. Do it now, and tell no one. I'll handle Mr. Tuttle and his associate, as Harrow set to work. Miss Marple returned to the village, her mind buzzing with plans. Tuttle's meeting with Mr. Black that evening would be the pivot point. If Tuttle could convince Black the package was lost, it would give her time to investigate the box's contents and uncover Black's employer. But she needed an ally, someone with access to knowledge beyond the village's borders. She found her answer in Miss Clara Vane, the village librarian, a sprightly woman in her 50s with a passion for obscure texts. Clara was shelving books when Miss Marple entered the small library, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes and yellowed maps. Miss Marple, Clara exclaimed, her eyes bright behind horn-rimmed glasses. Looking for a cozy mystery, too. Pass the afternoon. Not today, Clara, Miss Marple said with a smile. I need your expertise. Have you any books on local legends, particularly those mentioning a sparrow's nest or an ancient relic? Clara's brow furrowed. The sparrow's nest? That's an old tale, half forgotten. Let me see. She bustled to a dusty corner, pulling out a slim volume bound in faded green cloth. This is Legends of St. Mary Mead, compiled by a vicar. In the 1800s, there's a chapter on a relic of vial, they say, hidden in a place called the Sparrow's Nest. Supposedly, it held something powerful, maybe dangerous. The story's vague, but it mentions a chest in the church crypt. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The chest in the crypt, the vial, the sparrow symbolet all aligned. Thank you, Clara, she said. Might I borrow this? Of course, Clara said, handing her the book. But be careful, Jane. Old secrets have a way of stirring trouble. Miss Marple spent the afternoon poring over the book, her neat handwriting filling pages of her notebook with connections. The vial, if the legends were true, could be the sparrow's blood mentioned in whispers of poison or a cure, hidden centuries ago to protect or destroy. Its value to an outsider like Mr. Black suggested a darker purpose. Perhaps a sale to a collector, or worse. As dusk fell, Miss Marple prepared for the evening. She donned a dark shawl and slipped out, moving silently through the village to a spot near the Blue Boar Inn's outskirts, where Tuttle was to meet Mr. Black. Hidden behind a hedge, she watched as Tuttle approached, his limp more pronounced in his nervous state. A tall man in a black coat, Mr. Black, no doubt emerged from the inn's shadows. Well? Black's voice was sharp, impatient. The package. Tuttle wrung his hands. It's gone, Sir Stolen. I checked the barn this morning, and it wasn't there. Black's eyes narrowed. Stolen. By whom? I don't know, Tuttle said, his voice trembling, but convincing. Maybe someone else in the village got wind of it. I swear, I did as you asked. Black swore under his breath, pacing. This complicates things. The boss won't be pleased. You'd better not be lying, Tuttle, or you'll regret it. I'm not, sir, Tuttle said, his fear genuine. I'll keep looking, I promise. Black waved him off. Do that. And keep your mouth shut. I'll be back tomorrow night. Find that package, or you're finished. As Black stalked away, Miss Marple slipped back into the darkness, her heart racing with satisfaction. Tuttle had played his part well, and the package was safe for now. But Black's mention of the boss confirmed her suspicions a larger scheme was at play, one that threatened more than just St. Mary Mead. She returned home, her mind alight with the next steps. The box in the oak needed to be examined, perhaps by her chemist friend in the next town, and Mr. Black's employer needed to be identified before he could make his next move. Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting resumed, but her thoughts were far from idle. The village's peace hung by a thread, and she was determined to hold it fast.